Blood on the Mountain. The morning of September 23rd, 2024, dawned crystal clear over Glacier National Park, Montana, with the kind of pristine visibility that photographers and hikers dream about. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a 34-year-old wildlife biologist from the University of Montana, stood at the trailhead of the Highline Trail, adjusting the straps of her 65-liter backpack while reviewing her research notes one final time. The autumn air carried the sharp scent of pine and the distant promise of the first snow, though temperatures still held steady in the low 60s during the day. Sarah had been planning this research expedition for 18 months, seeking to document grizzly bear denning behavior in the remote backcountry of the Crown of the Continent ecosystem. Joining Sarah on this 5-day expedition were 7 other adults, each bringing their own expertise and reasons for venturing into some of Montana's most pristine and dangerous wilderness. Dr. Marcus Rodriguez, 41, served as the expedition's lead photographer and videographer, his weathered hands already checking the settings on his professional-grade Canon equipment despite the early hour. Marcus had spent the better part of 2 decades documenting wildlife across North America, from polar bears in Churchill to mountain goats in the North Cascades, but grizzlies remained his white whale, the species he'd never quite captured in the dramatic fashion his artistic vision demanded. Standing nearby, James Bear Thompson, a 52-year-old former Army Ranger turned wilderness guide, methodically checked each member's gear with the precision that had kept him alive through 3 tours in Afghanistan and countless backcountry expeditions since returning to civilian life. His nickname had nothing to do with Ursine encounters and everything to do with his imposing 6'4" frame and the methodical way he approached danger. Like a bear himself, deliberate and unafraid. Bear had guided over 300 expeditions into grizzly country without a single serious incident, a record that had earned him respect throughout the guiding community and a steady stream of clients willing to pay premium rates for his expertise. Dr. Elena Vasquez, 38, represented the geological component of their interdisciplinary research team. As a professor of environmental geology at Montana State University, she intended to collect soil and water samples from areas where grizzlies had been denning, hoping to understand how bear activity affected local ecosystem chemistry. Her petite frame and quiet demeanor belied a fierce determination and an intimate knowledge of the mountains that had impressed even Bear during their planning sessions. Elena had grown up in nearby Browning on the Blackfeet Reservation and possessed an intuitive understanding of the landscape that complemented her academic training. The expedition's medic, Dr. Tom Harrison, 45, had volunteered for the trip as a working vacation from his position as an emergency room physician at Kalispell Regional Medical Center. Tom's experiences treating everything from heart attacks to bear maulings in rural Montana had taught him the critical importance of wilderness medicine, and he carried an extensive medical kit that could handle everything from minor cuts to major trauma. His decision to join the expedition had been motivated partly by professional curiosity and partly by a midlife desire to reconnect with the outdoors after years of hospital fluorescent lighting. Jennifer Walsh, 29, worked as a wildlife photographer and journalist for National Geographic, and she viewed this expedition as an opportunity to document the complex relationship between human research and wildlife conservation. Her assignment focused on telling the story of modern scientific research in grizzly habitat, with particular attention to how climate change was affecting bear behavior patterns. Jennifer's portfolio included award-winning work from locations across the globe, but she had specifically requested assignment to this story because of her Montana roots and her commitment to conservation journalism. The group's cook and logistics coordinator, David Kim, 31, had taken a sabbatical from his position as a chef at a high-end Bozeman restaurant to pursue his passion for backcountry cooking and wilderness skills. David's Korean-American heritage had led him to develop a unique fusion approach to trail cooking that combined traditional techniques with modern nutritional science. More importantly, for expedition safety, David had completed wilderness first responder training and held certifications in rope rescue and swift water rescue. Finally, Lisa Anderson, 27, served as the expedition's research assistant and data recorder. Fresh from completing her master's degree in wildlife ecology at the University of Montana, Lisa had specifically designed her thesis around grizzly denning behavior and saw this expedition as crucial fieldwork for her planned doctoral research. Her academic advisor, Dr. Mitchell, had recommended her for the expedition based on her exceptional field skills and her ability to remain calm under pressure. The Highline Trail, stretching from Logan Pass to Granite Park Chalet, represented one of the most spectacular and potentially dangerous hikes in Glacier National Park. The trail follows the Continental Divide through prime grizzly habitat, offering unparalleled views of the surrounding peaks while passing through areas where human-bear encounters occur with concerning regularity. Park Service records indicated that grizzlies had been responsible for 3 serious attacks on the Highline Trail system over the past 5 years, including one fatality in 2021 when a solo hiker surprised a sow with cubs near Hidden Lake. As the group departed the Logan Pass trailhead at 7:30 a.m., the parking area already showed signs of the peak autumn visitation that made September one of the busiest months in Glacier National Park. Day hikers, equipped with water bottles and light day packs, were beginning their own journeys along the same trail, though few would venture beyond the first few miles. The contrast between the day hikers' casual preparation and the expedition team's extensive gear highlighted the difference between tourism and serious backcountry research. The first section of the Highline Trail hugs the Continental Divide through a landscape of alpine meadows and scattered whitebark pine groves. Dr. Mitchell maintained a steady pace while constantly scanning the terrain for signs of grizzly activity. Fresh scat approximately 2 days old appeared at the 1.2-mile mark, large enough to indicate a substantial bear and containing the remnants of both vegetation and small mammals. The discovery prompted the first of many discussions about bear behavior patterns and local population dynamics. Based on the size and composition, I'd estimate this came from a male, probably in the 400-pound range, Dr. Mitchell explained to the group as she collected a sample for later analysis. The presence of rodent fur suggests he's been actively hunting ground squirrels and marmots, which is typical behavior for this time of year as they prepare for denning. Bear Thompson examined the scat with the experienced eye of someone who had been reading wilderness signs for over 3 decades. "The age looks right for morning of day before yesterday," he confirmed. "Weather's been dry, so it hasn't degraded much. More importantly, the location suggests this bear is comfortable moving along human-used trails, which could indicate either habituation or territorial confidence." The group continued hiking through increasingly spectacular terrain as the trail gained elevation and offered sweeping views of the Livingston Range to the north and the Lewis Range to the south. Photography stops became frequent as Marcus documented both the landscape and the research team's work, while Jennifer interviewed various team members about their specialties and expectations for the expedition. By 10:15 a.m., the group had covered 3.8 miles and reached the intersection with the Hidden Lake Overlook Trail. Dr. Mitchell called for an extended rest stop to allow for biological sampling and to observe wildlife activity in the area. Elena collected soil samples from areas showing evidence of bear digging, while Lisa recorded GPS coordinates and environmental data for each sample location. The Hidden Lake area had experienced significant grizzly activity throughout the summer, according to Park Service reports that Dr. Mitchell had reviewed during expedition planning. A family group consisting of a sow and 2 yearling cubs had been regularly observed in the area, leading to periodic trail closures when their behavior suggested potential aggression toward humans. Current Park Service intelligence indicated that the family group had moved toward higher elevation as autumn progressed, but their exact location remained unknown. The challenge with grizzly research, Dr. Mitchell explained to Jennifer during a recorded interview, is that these animals have individual personalities and behavioral patterns that can vary dramatically even within the same population. What we're trying to understand is how environmental factors like climate change, human pressure, and habitat fragmentation affect not just population-level behavior, but individual decision-making processes. David Kim had set up his portable camp stove and was preparing an early lunch featuring locally sourced ingredients and trail-appropriate preparations. The aroma of his Korean-inspired bulgogi beef with dehydrated vegetables attracted curious looks from passing day hikers, several of whom stopped to chat with the expedition team about their research objectives. Dr. Harrison used the extended break to conduct informal medical checks on all team members, paying particular attention to hydration levels and any signs of altitude-related issues. At their current elevation of approximately 7,200 feet, most team members were experiencing minor effects from the thin air, particularly those who had traveled from lower elevations for the expedition. The conversation during lunch ranged from technical discussions about bear denning site selection to more philosophical questions about the ethics of wildlife research in an era of increasing human pressure on natural systems. Elena shared stories from her childhood on the Blackfeet Reservation, where grizzly bears held deep cultural significance and where traditional ecological knowledge provided insights that complemented modern scientific methods. "My grandfather always said that bears choose their den sites based on dreams," Elena explained. "From a scientific perspective, we know they're responding to factors like slope orientation, snow accumulation patterns, and soil stability. But there's something about the traditional understanding that recognizes the complexity of animal decision-making that our scientific models sometimes miss." By 12:45 p.m., the expedition resumed hiking toward Granite Park Chalet, where they planned to spend their first night. The trail beyond Hidden Lake becomes more remote and challenging, with fewer day hikers and increased wildlife activity. Bear Thompson adjusted the group's formation to maintain better visibility and communication, with himself taking point and Dr. Mitchell bringing up the rear. The afternoon section of the Highline Trail passes through prime grizzly foraging habitat, including extensive huckleberry patches that serve as critical food sources during the pre-denning period. Signs of recent bear activity became increasingly frequent, including fresh digging sites, overturned logs, and claw marks on trees. The team's pace slowed as they documented each discovery and collected additional samples. At 2:20 p.m., Marcus spotted movement in a meadow approximately 800 yards north of the trail. Extended observation through binoculars revealed a lone grizzly bear, estimated at 300 to 350 pounds, methodically working through a berry patch. The bear appeared unaware of the human presence and provided an excellent opportunity for long-distance photography and behavioral observation. "This is exactly the kind of natural behavior we want to document," Dr. Mitchell whispered, as the team took cover behind a cluster of boulders to observe without disturbing the bear. "Notice how systematically he's working through the patch, maximizing caloric intake while minimizing energy expenditure. This efficiency becomes critical as bears approach denning season." The observation session lasted 45 minutes, during which Marcus captured over 200 photographs and several minutes of video footage showing natural foraging behavior. Jennifer recorded detailed notes about the bear's size, condition, and behavioral patterns, while Lisa documented environmental factors that might influence the bear's choices. The bear eventually moved out of sight toward higher elevation, allowing the expedition to resume hiking. However, the encounter had provided valuable insights into current bear activity patterns and confirmed that the research team was entering areas of high grizzly density. Granite Park Chalet, constructed in 1914 and rebuilt after a 1980s fire, sits at 6,693 feet elevation and provides rustic accommodations for backcountry visitors. The chalet's location offers commanding views of the surrounding peaks, while serving as a hub for multiple trail systems. More importantly for the expedition's purposes, the chalet area had been the site of extensive grizzly research over several decades, making it an ideal base camp for comparative studies. The expedition arrived at Granite Park Chalet at 4:30 p.m., having covered 7.6 miles of challenging terrain while conducting continuous research activities. Check-in procedures at the chalet included mandatory bear safety briefings and review of food storage protocols, reflecting the area's reputation for frequent human-bear encounters. Chalet manager Robert Bob McKenzie, 58, had been working in the backcountry for over 20 years and possessed an encyclopedic knowledge of local bear behavior patterns. His evening briefing to the expedition team included detailed updates on recent grizzly activity in the area, with particular attention to individual bears that had shown concerning behaviors. "We've got a big male, probably 500 plus pounds, that's been working the avalanche chutes about 2 miles east of here," Bob explained, while pointing 2 locations on a detailed topographic map. "He's not shown any aggression toward humans, but he's definitely not afraid of us either. More concerning is a smaller bear, maybe 350 pounds, that's been getting into food storage areas around other backcountry camps. That kind of behavior typically escalates." The evening at Granite Park Chalet provided opportunities for the expedition team to organize their research materials, plan the following day's activities, and interact with other backcountry visitors who might have relevant wildlife observations. A group of experienced climbers from Colorado reported seeing fresh grizzly tracks near Swiftcurrent Pass, while a family of hikers from Oregon described a distant bear sighting near Mount Gould. Dr. Mitchell spent the evening reviewing her research protocols and updating her field notes with observations from the day's hike. The data collected during their first day had already provided valuable insights into current bear activity patterns and confirmed several hypotheses about habitat use during the pre-denning period. David Kim prepared dinner using the chalet's kitchen facilities, creating a meal that combined expedition nutrition requirements with the social aspects of shared dining. The evening meal became an opportunity for team building and informal information sharing among expedition members. Jennifer Walsh conducted evening interviews with various team members, focusing on their first impressions of the research area and their expectations for the remainder of the expedition. These interviews would later provide important context for her National Geographic story about the intersection of human research and wildlife conservation. Night at Granite Park Chalet brought the unique soundscape of high-altitude wilderness, including the distant calls of elk, the occasional howl of wolves, and the persistent sound of wind through the surrounding peaks. Bear Thompson conducted final security checks and reviewed emergency procedures with all team members before lights out at 10:30 p.m. September 24th began with a pre-dawn temperature of 38 degrees Fahrenheit and clear skies that promised another day of excellent research conditions. The expedition's second-day objectives included hiking to Swiftcurrent Pass and establishing a temporary research camp in an area known for high grizzly denning activity. This more remote location would provide opportunities to study bear behavior with minimal human influence while collecting data about denning site selection criteria. Breakfast at 6 a.m. featured David Kim's high-energy trail preparations designed to fuel a challenging day of hiking and research activities. The meal included locally sourced proteins, complex carbohydrates, and carefully calculated electrolyte levels to maintain peak performance at high altitude. Pre-departure preparations included detailed gear checks, communication equipment testing, and final reviews of emergency procedures. The day's route would take the expedition into more remote terrain with limited escape routes and no cell phone coverage, making thorough preparation essential for safety. Dr. Mitchell briefed the team on the day's research objectives, which included establishing baseline measurements for grizzly denning habitat, collecting additional biological samples, and conducting extended behavioral observations if bears were encountered. The scientific value of the expedition depended heavily on collecting data from multiple locations and under varying environmental conditions. The trail from Granite Park Chalet towards Swift Current Pass begins with a gradual ascent through subalpine forest before emerging into open meadows and talus slopes characteristic of high-altitude ecosystems. This habitat transition zone often concentrates wildlife activity and provides excellent opportunities for research observations. At 7:45 a.m., the expedition departed Granite Park Chalet under clear skies with unlimited visibility. Early morning wildlife activity included observations of pika, marmots, and mountain goats, all species that serve as potential prey for grizzly bears. The abundance of small mammals in the area suggested favorable conditions for bear foraging and potentially influenced denning site selection. The first significant discovery occurred at 9:20 a.m. when Lisa Anderson identified fresh grizzly tracks in a muddy section of trail near a seasonal creek crossing. The tracks measured approximately 10 inches in length and showed clear claw marks extending well beyond the toe pads, indicating a large adult bear that had passed through the area within the previous 12 to 24 hours. "These are definitely from a big animal," Bear Thompson observed, while photographing the tracks for documentation purposes. "Based on the depth of impression and the stride length, I'd estimate 450 to 500 pounds minimum. The freshness suggests this bear is actively using this travel corridor, which could indicate proximity to either feeding areas or potential denning sites." Dr. Mitchell collected plaster casts of the clearest tracks, while Elena documented soil conditions and environmental factors that might influence track preservation. Marcus captured detailed photographs of the tracks from multiple angles, ensuring that the discovery would be properly documented for later analysis. The presence of fresh tracks prompted adjustments to the expedition's hiking formation and communication procedures. Bear Thompson moved the group into a tighter formation with improved sightlines and established hand signals for silent communication if wildlife encounters required stealth or caution. Ascending towards Swift Current Pass, the trail becomes increasingly challenging as it gains elevation through a series of switchbacks across exposed slopes. The terrain offers spectacular views of the surrounding peaks while providing limited cover for either humans or wildlife. This exposure creates a tactical advantage for spotting bears at distance, but also eliminates options for concealment if encounters become problematic. At 11:30 a.m., the expedition reached an elevation of approximately 7,800 feet and entered the zone where grizzlies typically begin selecting denning sites. Dr. Mitchell's research indicated that bears in this ecosystem preferred denning elevations between 7,500 and 8,500 feet, with specific site selection influenced by factors including slope orientation, snow accumulation patterns, and proximity to late-season food sources. The team established a temporary research station near a cluster of suitable denning sites to conduct detailed habitat assessments and biological sampling. Elena collected soil samples from multiple elevations and slope orientations, while Dr. Mitchell documented vegetation characteristics and microclimate factors that might influence bear site selection. During the extended research stop, Jennifer Walsh interviewed Dr. Mitchell about the broader implications of grizzly denning research for wildlife conservation and ecosystem management. The interview provided opportunities to discuss how climate change was affecting traditional denning patterns and what those changes might mean for long-term population stability. What we're seeing across the northern Rockies is a trend toward later denning and earlier emergence, Dr. Mitchell explained. That might sound like a minor change, but it has cascading effects on reproductive success, cub survival, and competition for resources. Understanding these patterns helps us predict how grizzly populations will respond to continued environmental changes. The research activities continued through the early afternoon, with team members collecting data across multiple disciplines while maintaining constant awareness of their surroundings for wildlife activity. The remote location and obvious suitability for grizzly denning created an underlying tension that kept everyone alert, despite the routine nature of their scientific work. At 1:45 p.m., Marcus Rodriguez spotted movement on a distant slope approximately 1,200 yards to the northeast. Extended observation through high-powered binoculars revealed a large grizzly bear methodically investigating potential denning sites along a series of rocky outcrops. The bear's behavior suggested active site selection rather than casual foraging, providing an unprecedented opportunity to observe natural denning behavior. "This is extraordinary, Doctor," Mitchell whispered as the team took cover behind a rocky ridge to observe without disturbing the bear. Actual denning site selection behavior is rarely observed in the wild. Most of our understanding comes from tracking studies and post-denning site analysis. The observation session extended for over 2 hours as the bear systematically investigated multiple potential denning locations. The animal's methodical approach included digging test excavations, examining drainage patterns, and testing the structural integrity of potential sites. Marcus captured extensive video footage of the behavior, while Dr. Mitchell provided detailed scientific commentary for later analysis. "Notice how he's testing the soil composition and drainage characteristics," Dr. Mitchell observed. "Successful denning sites require specific conditions for insulation, structural stability, and protection from water infiltration. This bear is demonstrating remarkable, sophisticated decision-making processes." The bear's investigation process provided insights into grizzly intelligence and planning capabilities that exceeded what most scientific literature had documented. The animal's systematic approach suggested complex cognitive processes and environmental assessment abilities that challenged traditional understanding of bear behavior. At 4:20 p.m., the bear selected a site on a north-facing slope with specific characteristics that aligned perfectly with Dr. Mitchell's research hypotheses about optimal denning conditions. The chosen location offered protection from prevailing winds, appropriate drainage, and suitable soil composition for excavation while maintaining proximity to late-season food sources. The bear began preliminary excavation work, providing additional opportunities for behavioral documentation and scientific observation. However, the late afternoon timing and the expedition's need to establish camp before darkness prompted difficult decisions about continuing observation versus ensuring team safety. Bear Thompson's assessment of weather conditions and remaining daylight led to a group decision to establish camp in a defensible location approximately 800 yards from the observed denning activity. This distance provided safety buffer while maintaining opportunities for continued observation and documentation. Camp establishment in grizzly habitat requires specific protocols for food storage, waste management, and perimeter security. Bear Thompson supervised the setup process while Dr. Harrison prepared medical equipment and communication systems for the remote location camping. David Kim's dinner preparations emphasized nutrition and energy requirements, while adhering to strict bear safety protocols for food handling and storage. The meal preparation process attracted curious observations from team members who were experiencing their first night of camping in active grizzly denning habitat. Evening activities included data organization, equipment maintenance, and planning for the following day's research objectives. The proximity to active grizzly denning behavior created both excitement and underlying tension among expedition members who were acutely aware of their vulnerability in the remote location. Dr. Mitchell spent the evening reviewing video footage from the day's observations and updating her research notes with detailed behavioral documentation. The scientific value of the observed denning behavior exceeded her most optimistic expectations for the expedition and provided data that would contribute significantly to understanding grizzly ecology. Jennifer Walsh conducted evening interviews focusing on team members' reactions to observing wild grizzly denning behavior and their perspectives on the balance between scientific research and wildlife conservation. These interviews captured the emotional and philosophical aspects of wildlife research that complemented the technical scientific data. Night in grizzly denning habitat brought heightened awareness of wilderness sounds and environmental changes. Bear Thompson established watch rotations and reviewed emergency procedures while emphasizing the importance of maintaining alertness throughout the night period. The third day of the expedition, September 25th, began with frost-covered gear and temperatures that had dropped to 29 degrees Fahrenheit during the night. Clear skies promised another day of excellent research conditions, but the temperature drop also signaled the approach of winter conditions that would soon drive grizzlies into their dens for the season. Morning observations revealed that the grizzly bear had continued excavation work throughout the night, making substantial progress on what appeared to be a serious denning site. The bear's continued presence in the area created both research opportunities and safety concerns for the expedition team. Breakfast preparations required extra time due to frozen water supplies and the need to warm equipment before use. David Kim's morning meal emphasized warming foods and high-energy content to help team members adapt to the temperature drop and prepare for another demanding day of research activities. Pre-departure preparations included detailed discussions about maintaining safe distances from the active denning site while continuing scientific observations and data collection. The balance between research objectives and safety requirements demanded careful planning and constant situational awareness. At 8 a.m., the expedition established an observation post approximately 600 yards from the denning site, using natural terrain features to provide concealment while maintaining sightlines for documentation and safety monitoring. The observation post location offered excellent photography opportunities while ensuring multiple escape routes if the bear's behavior became concerning. Extended morning observations revealed sophisticated denning site preparation behaviors that provided unprecedented insights into grizzly intelligence and planning capabilities. The bear's systematic approach to excavation, drainage management, and site modification demonstrated complex problem-solving abilities that challenged traditional understanding of animal cognition. What we're witnessing contradicts several established theories about grizzly denning behavior, Dr. Mitchell explained during recorded observations. The level of site modification and the systematic approach to solving engineering problems suggests cognitive abilities that most wildlife literature has underestimated. The morning observation session extended for over 3 hours as the bear continued methodical site preparation work. Marcus captured extensive video footage, while Dr. Mitchell provided detailed scientific commentary that would serve as primary source material for future research publications. At 11:30 a.m., the bear's behavior changed significantly as it appeared to detect the human presence despite the expedition's careful concealment efforts. The animal began displaying alertness behaviors, including frequent head lifting, nostril flaring, and positioning changes that suggested awareness of potential threats. "He knows we're here," Bear Thompson observed quietly. "The question is whether he considers us a threat or just a curiosity. His body language suggests heightened awareness, but not immediate aggression." The change in bear behavior prompted immediate adjustments to expedition positioning and emergency preparedness. Dr. Harrison checked medical equipment, while team members reviewed evacuation procedures and communication protocols for potential emergency situations. Dr. Mitchell made the difficult decision to discontinue direct observation activities and begin a careful withdrawal from the area to avoid influencing the bear's natural denning behavior. The scientific value of uninfluenced behavioral observations outweighed the benefits of continued documentation at closer range. The withdrawal process required careful coordination and stealth to avoid triggering defensive or aggressive responses from the bear. Bear Thompson led the movement using terrain features and wind direction to minimize human scent detection, while maintaining visual contact with the animal throughout the process. At 12:45 p.m., the expedition had successfully withdrawn to a distance of approximately 1,200 yards from the denning site, while maintaining observation capabilities through high-powered optics. The increased distance reduced research detail but eliminated human influence on the bear's natural behavior patterns. The afternoon provided opportunities for extended-range behavioral observations while conducting research activities in areas that showed evidence of historical grizzly denning activity. Elena collected soil samples from multiple sites, while Dr. Mitchell documented vegetation characteristics and environmental factors that might influence long-term habitat suitability. Extended observations revealed that the grizzly continued denning site preparation work despite the earlier awareness of human presence. The bear's commitment to the selected location suggested that site-specific factors outweighed concerns about human activity in the area. This behavior demonstrates remarkable site fidelity and decision-making confidence, Dr. Mitchell noted during afternoon observations. The bear has obviously evaluated multiple factors and determined that this location meets critical denning requirements despite potential human disturbance. The afternoon research activities included detailed documentation of multiple potential denning sites in the area, providing comparative data about habitat characteristics and environmental factors that influence grizzly site selection decisions. This comparative analysis would contribute significantly to understanding ecosystem-level patterns in denning behavior. At 3:30 p.m., weather conditions began changing as high clouds moved in from the west, creating the potential for precipitation and reduced visibility. Bear Thompson assessed weather patterns and made preliminary decisions about potential emergency procedures if conditions deteriorated rapidly. The changing weather prompted adjustments to research activities and camp preparation procedures. David Kim began early dinner preparations, while other team members secured equipment and reviewed emergency protocols for potential storm conditions. Evening activities included detailed data organization and preliminary analysis of the behavioral observations collected during 3 days of fieldwork. Dr. Mitchell's review of video footage and field notes revealed patterns and insights that exceeded initial research expectations for the expedition. Jennifer Walsh conducted extended evening interviews with multiple team members about their experiences observing wild grizzly denning behavior and their perspectives on the scientific and conservation implications of the research findings. The third night in grizzly habitat brought increased wildlife activity as temperature drops and changing weather patterns influenced animal behavior throughout the ecosystem. Enhanced watch procedures and communication protocols reflected the expedition's growing awareness of their vulnerability in the remote mountain environment. September 26th dawned overcast, with temperatures holding steady at 35 degrees Fahrenheit and intermittent light snow that created challenging conditions for both research activities and outdoor living. The weather change marked a significant transition toward winter conditions that would soon end grizzly activity and initiate the denning period. Morning observations revealed that the grizzly had made substantial progress on denning site excavation and appeared to be nearing completion of site preparation activities. The bear's systematic work throughout adverse weather conditions demonstrated the urgency of pre-winter preparations and the critical importance of successful denning sites. Breakfast preparations required additional time and fuel consumption due to wet conditions and the need to maintain team morale and energy levels during challenging weather. David Kim's menu emphasized warming foods and high-energy content while adapting cooking procedures to wet and windy conditions. The weather conditions created new challenges for research documentation as snow and wind affected photography equipment and made extended outdoor observations more difficult. Marcus adjusted his equipment setup and photography techniques to account for reduced visibility and moisture protection requirements. At 9:30 a.m., the expedition established a weather-protected observation post that provided shelter while maintaining sight lines to the denning area. The modified observation procedures emphasize safety and equipment protection while continuing scientific documentation of denning behavior. Extended morning observations revealed that the grizzly continued denning site work despite deteriorating weather conditions. The bear's persistence demonstrated the critical importance of completing site preparation before winter weather made excavation activities impossible. This behavior illustrates the narrow window that grizzlies have for denning site preparation, Dr. Mitchell explained during recorded observations. Delays or interruptions during this critical period can have life-threatening consequences for successful winter survival. No. The morning observation session provided additional insights into grizzly adaptation to environmental challenges and the sophisticated behavioral responses that enable survival in harsh mountain ecosystems. The bear's systematic approach to weather-related problems demonstrated remarkable cognitive flexibility. At 11:45 a.m., the bear's behavior indicated that denning site preparation was approaching completion. The animal began exhibiting behaviors associated with site evaluation and final modifications, suggesting that active excavation work would soon be finished. The approaching completion of denning site preparation created both research opportunities and safety concerns for the expedition team. Completed dens often trigger territorial behaviors in grizzlies, potentially making the bears more defensive of their selected areas. Dr. Mitchell made preliminary decisions about concluding field observations and beginning the return journey to Granite Park Chalet. The scientific objectives of the expedition had been exceeded, and continued presence in the area might interfere with the bear's natural denning behavior. At 1:20 p.m., the weather conditions deteriorated significantly as snow intensity increased and wind speeds created whiteout conditions that eliminated visibility beyond 50 yards. The sudden weather change created potential emergency conditions that required immediate response and evacuation procedures. Bear Thompson initiated emergency protocols for severe weather evacuation, while team members secured essential equipment and prepared for immediate departure from the research area. The expedition's remote location and limited visibility created serious challenges for safe navigation and evacuation. The emergency evacuation required careful navigation through terrain that had become treacherous due to snow accumulation and reduced visibility. Bear Thompson led the group using compass bearings and landmark recognition, while other team members maintained close formation and communication. Dr. Harrison monitored team members for signs of hypothermia and weather-related medical issues while assisting with equipment management and evacuation procedures. The combination of physical exertion, cold temperatures, and stress created conditions that could rapidly lead to medical emergencies. At 2:45 p.m., the expedition reached a partially sheltered area that provided temporary protection from the worst weather conditions. The location offered opportunities to assess team condition and equipment status while making decisions about continued evacuation versus establishing emergency shelter. The weather assessment indicated that conditions would likely continue deteriorating throughout the afternoon and evening, making continued travel increasingly dangerous. Bear Thompson made the difficult decision to establish emergency shelter and wait for improved conditions rather than risk navigation in whiteout conditions. Emergency shelter establishment required rapid deployment of expedition gear and careful attention to heating, ventilation, and food preparation under adverse conditions. David Kim adapted cooking procedures to enclosed space requirements, while Dr. Harrison monitored team members for weather-related health issues. The emergency shelter situation created bonding experiences among expedition members, while testing individual and group resilience under challenging conditions. Jennifer Walsh documented the experience as an example of wilderness research realities that contrasted with idealized outdoor adventure narratives. Evening activities in emergency shelter included equipment maintenance, food preparation, and communication attempts with outside support personnel. The expedition's satellite communication equipment provided limited connectivity that enabled basic status updates but insufficient bandwidth for detailed reporting. The fourth night of the expedition brought the most challenging conditions yet experienced as temperatures dropped below freezing and snow accumulation created structural loading on emergency shelter systems. Enhanced watch procedures and equipment monitoring reflected serious concerns about shelter integrity and team safety. September 27th began with clearing skies and temperatures that had dropped to 22 degrees Fahrenheit during the night, creating beautiful but dangerous conditions as the expedition prepared to resume travel toward Granite Park Chalet. Snow accumulation of approximately 8 inches had transformed the landscape and created new challenges for navigation and equipment management. Morning assessments revealed that all team members had survived the emergency shelter night without serious weather-related health issues, though several individuals showed signs of mild hypothermia and dehydration that required monitoring and treatment by Dr. Harrison. Breakfast preparations emphasized warming foods and energy replacement, while adapting cooking procedures to snow conditions and limited fuel availability. David Kim's menu prioritized caloric density and warming effects while conserving expedition resources for continued travel and safety requirements. Equipment assessment revealed minor damage to several items, but no critical failures that would compromise expedition safety or research capabilities. Marcus documented snow conditions and their effects on scientific equipment while preparing photography gear for travel in winter conditions. At 8:30 a.m., the expedition began the return journey to Granite Park Chalet using snowshoe equipment and modified navigation procedures adapted to winter travel conditions. The route required careful attention to avalanche hazards and hidden obstacles that snow accumulation had created or concealed. Travel conditions proved more challenging than anticipated, as snow depth varied significantly with terrain features and wind patterns. Bear Thompson adjusted route selection and pace to account for increased energy expenditure and potential navigation difficulties in transformed landscape conditions. The morning travel included opportunities for unique research observations, as the early snow provided insights into how environmental changes affect grizzly denning behavior and habitat use patterns. Dr. Mitchell documented how snow accumulation influenced the suitability of various potential denning sites. At 10:45 a.m., the expedition encountered fresh grizzly tracks in the snow that indicated recent bear activity despite the challenging weather conditions. The tracks appeared to be from the same large male that had been observed during denning site preparation activities, suggesting continued presence in the research area. These tracks are less than 6 hours old, Bear Thompson assessed while examining the snow conditions and track preservation characteristics. This bear is still active despite conditions that would normally trigger denning behavior. That could indicate either delayed denning or unusual individual behavioral patterns. The discovery of fresh tracks prompted heightened alertness and modified travel procedures as the expedition continued toward Granite Park Chalet. The combination of reduced visibility, challenging travel conditions, and active grizzly presence created serious safety concerns that required constant attention. Dr. Mitchell's analysis of the track evidence suggested that climate change might be affecting traditional denning timing and behavior patterns in ways that current scientific literature had not fully documented. The observations provided additional evidence for her research hypotheses about environmental change impacts on grizzly ecology. Travel throughout the late morning and early afternoon proved exhausting as team members dealt with increased energy demands from snow travel while carrying full expedition equipment loads. Dr. Harrison monitored individual performance and provided medical support for minor injuries and exhaustion symptoms. At 1:30 p.m., the expedition reached the familiar terrain near Granite Park Chalet, though snow accumulation had significantly altered landmark recognition and navigation references. The approaching safety of the chalet facility provided psychological relief while maintaining requirements for caution and alertness. Arrival at Granite Park Chalet at 2:45 p.m. marked the successful completion of the expedition's primary research objectives under conditions that had tested both individual and group capabilities. Chalet manager Bob McKenzie assisted with expedition debriefing and provided updates on weather forecasts and trail conditions. The chalet provided opportunities for equipment drying, gear organization, and preliminary data analysis, while team members recovered from the physical and psychological demands of the emergency weather conditions. David Kim prepared celebratory meals that emphasized nutrition and comfort food aspects. Evening activities included detailed debriefing sessions about research findings, safety procedures, and expedition management under challenging conditions. Dr. Mitchell reviewed scientific data, while other team members documented their experiences and perspectives on wilderness research realities. Jennifer Walsh conducted comprehensive interviews with all expedition members about their experiences and perspectives on the intersection of scientific research, wilderness safety, and environmental change. These interviews provided essential context for her National Geographic story about modern conservation research. The final night at Granite Park Chalet offered opportunities for reflection on expedition achievements and challenges while preparing for the return journey to Logan Pass Trailhead. Enhanced appreciation for wilderness experiences and scientific research combined with relief at successful completion of challenging expedition objectives. September 28th brought clear skies and moderate temperatures that promised excellent conditions for the return hike to Logan Pass, though snow accumulation would continue to affect trail conditions and require careful attention to navigation and safety procedures. Morning preparations included final gear organization, data backup procedures, and coordination with chalet management about trail conditions and weather forecasts for the return journey. Bob McKenzie provided detailed updates on recent trail reports and wildlife activity information. Departure from Granite Park Chalet at 8 a.m. marked the beginning of the expedition's final day, with team members experiencing mixed emotions about leaving the research area while anticipating return to civilization and analysis of collected scientific data. The return journey along the Highline Trail provided opportunities for additional research observations while dealing with snow-covered trail conditions that required modified hiking techniques and increased attention to route finding and safety procedures. Morning travel proceeded smoothly as the expedition retraced familiar terrain while documenting how snow accumulation had affected various ecological zones and habitat characteristics. Dr. Mitchell continued collecting data about environmental change impacts on grizzly habitat suitability. At 10:30 a.m., the expedition encountered a group of day hikers who had started early from Logan Pass and were struggling with snow conditions for which they had not adequately prepared. The encounter provided opportunities for wilderness education and assistance while highlighting the risks of inadequate preparation for mountain conditions. Dr. Harrison provided medical assistance and advice to several day hikers who were showing signs of hypothermia and dehydration, while Bear Thompson assessed their equipment and preparation levels. The assistance delayed expedition progress but reflected ethical obligations to help struggling wilderness visitors. The day hiker encounter prompted discussions among expedition members about wilderness education, risk management, and the responsibilities of experienced outdoors people to assist others in challenging situations. Jennifer Walsh documented the interaction as an example of wilderness community dynamics. Continued travel throughout the late morning provided spectacular photography opportunities as clear skies and snow accumulation created dramatic landscape conditions. Marcus captured extensive documentation of winter mountain scenery while maintaining attention to expedition progress and safety requirements. At 12:45 p.m., the expedition reached the Hidden Lake Overlook area, where deep snow had created challenging route-finding conditions and required careful attention to hidden obstacles and terrain hazards that snow accumulation had concealed or modified. The Hidden Lake area provided opportunities for final biological sampling and data collection activities, while team members dealt with the physical demands of snow travel and the psychological transition from research expedition to return journey. Dr. Mitchell conducted final habitat assessments and collected additional soil samples, while Elena documented how snow accumulation affected various geological and hydrological features in the research area. Lisa recorded final GPS coordinates and environmental data for expedition database completion. Afternoon travel proved less challenging as the expedition descended to lower elevations where snow accumulation was reduced, and trail conditions were more favorable for efficient progress toward Logan Pass trailhead. The descent toward Logan Pass provided opportunities for reflection on expedition achievements and scientific discoveries while dealing with the physical demands of carrying full equipment loads over challenging terrain for extended distances. At 3:30 p.m., the expedition encountered the first sections of trail that were completely clear of snow, marking their return to elevations and ecological zones that had not been affected by the recent weather changes. The transition from snow-covered to clear trail conditions provided dramatic illustration of how elevation and microclimate factors create diverse environmental conditions within relatively small geographic areas. Dr. Mitchell documented these transitions as examples of habitat diversity within grizzly ecosystems. Late afternoon travel proceeded rapidly as improved trail conditions allowed increased pace and reduced energy expenditure, while team members anticipated completion of expedition objectives and return to Logan Pass trailhead. At 5:15 p.m., the expedition reached Logan Pass trailhead and the successful completion of their 5-day research expedition into grizzly denning habitat. Vehicle loading and departure preparations marked the transition from wilderness research to data analysis and publication phases of the scientific project. The expedition had exceeded all research objectives while providing team members with extraordinary experiences of wilderness research and grizzly behavior observation. Scientific data collected during the expedition would contribute significantly to understanding climate change impacts on grizzly ecology and denning behavior patterns. However, the expedition's conclusion would prove to be only the beginning of a much larger and more complex story involving wildlife management, human-bear conflicts, and the challenging realities of conservation in an era of increasing human pressure on natural systems. 3 weeks after the expedition's return, on October 18, 2024, the grizzly bear that the research team had observed during denning site preparation would emerge from his incomplete den during an unprecedented warm spell and begin a series of encounters with humans that would challenge every assumption about bear behavior and wilderness safety. The bear, designated as Bear 747 by Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks, had been tracked intermittently through GPS collar data that revealed unusual movement patterns and behavioral changes that concerned wildlife biologists throughout the region. The incomplete denning that Dr. Mitchell's team had observed had led to catastrophic disruption of normal hibernation cycles. Dr. Mitchell was reviewing expedition video footage in her University of Montana laboratory when her phone rang at 6:23 a.m. on October 18th, with news that would transform her scientific research project into a nightmare of human-wildlife conflict and personal trauma that would haunt her for years to come. Dr. Mitchell, this is Captain Jennifer Brooks with Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks, the voice said with professional urgency that immediately captured her attention. We have a situation involving Bear 747, the animal your expedition observed last month. We need your expertise immediately. The situation that Captain Brooks described over the phone exceeded every protocol and prediction that wildlife managers had developed for human-bear conflict resolution. Bear 747 had emerged from his incomplete den during the October warm spell in a state of metabolic confusion and extreme hunger that made him extraordinarily dangerous to humans in the area. During the 3 days prior to Captain Brooks' phone call, Bear 747 had been involved in 3 separate encounters with humans that escalated in severity and aggression. The bear's behavior suggested neurological damage or disease that might be related to the disrupted denning cycle that Dr. Mitchell's expedition had documented. The first incident occurred Tuesday morning when the bear approached a group of bow hunters near Swift Current Pass, Captain Brooks explained. No injuries, but the bear showed no fear of humans and actually advanced toward them when they tried to retreat. That's completely abnormal behavior for this individual. The second incident had occurred Wednesday evening when Bear 747 had entered a backcountry campsite and destroyed equipment while 3 campers watched from trees they had climbed for safety. The bear had spent over 2 hours systematically destroying camping gear while apparently searching for food that the campers had properly stored according to Park Service protocols. The third incident is what prompted my call, Captain Brooks continued. Yesterday afternoon, the bear attacked a horsepacker and his client near Granite Park Chalet. Both humans survived, but the injuries are severe and the bear's behavior was completely unprecedented in our experience. Dr. Mitchell's expedition footage and behavioral observations had become critical evidence for understanding Bear 747's deteriorating mental state and the environmental factors that might have triggered his abnormal aggression toward humans. Her scientific documentation was now being used to develop emergency response protocols and public safety measures. The Horsepacker attack had occurred at 3:45 p.m. on October 17th, when experienced outfitter Mike Patterson, 54, and his client Robert Chen, 42, a businessman from Seattle, encountered Bear 747 approximately 1.2 miles south of Granite Park Chalet. Patterson had been guiding wilderness pack trips for over 20 years without a serious bear incident. According to Patterson's statement to investigating officers, Bear 747 had approached their pack train without the normal caution that grizzlies typically show toward horses and humans. The bear's direct approach and lack of fear immediately signaled abnormal behavior that prompted Patterson to implement emergency bear encounter protocols. "I've seen hundreds of bears over the years, and this one was different from the moment we spotted him," Patterson explained to investigators. "No hesitation, no wariness, just a direct approach like he was hunting us. That's not normal grizzly behavior under any circumstances." Patterson had attempted to create distance between the bear and his client by maneuvering their horses and pack animals while making noise and displaying human presence. Standard bear encounter protocols typically succeed in convincing grizzlies to avoid human contact, but Bear 747 had ignored all deterrent efforts. The attack began when Bear 747 charged Patterson's lead horse, a 16-year-old gelding named Thunder, who had extensive experience with bear encounters and typically remained calm during wildlife encounters. The bear's assault on Thunder triggered a catastrophic chain of events that resulted in severe injuries to both humans. "The bear went straight for Thunder's throat," Patterson recalled during his hospital interview. 20 years of guiding, and I've never seen anything like it. This wasn't defensive behavior or territorial display. This was predatory hunting behavior directed at a 1,200-pound horse." Thunder's panicked response to the bear attack caused him to rear and strike out with his front hooves, catching Patterson in the chest and throwing him from the saddle onto the rocky trail surface. The impact resulted in 3 broken ribs, a punctured lung, and severe concussion that left Patterson semi-conscious during the subsequent events. Robert Chen's horse, a mare named Sunrise, had bolted when the attack began, carrying her rider away from the immediate danger zone, but also separating him from Patterson's protection and emergency equipment. Chen's inexperience with wilderness emergencies and horse handling left him unable to control Sunrise's panic response. Bear 747's attack on Thunder lasted approximately 90 seconds and resulted in massive trauma to the horse's neck and shoulder area before the animal's struggles and strikes forced the bear to release his hold. Thunder's survival was later attributed to his size and the protective effects of his heavy winter coat. With Thunder wounded but mobile, Bear 747 turned his attention to Patterson, who was lying semi-conscious on the trail, approximately 15 feet from the initial attack site. The bear's approach toward the injured human prompted Thunder to position himself between the bear and his handler, despite his own severe injuries. "That horse saved Mike's life," Chen later told investigators. "Even bleeding and hurt, Thunder kept putting himself between the bear and Mike. I've never seen courage like that from any animal." Bear 747's attention shifted between the injured horse and the human for several minutes, while Chen remained hidden in nearby timber, afraid to approach, but attempting to document the encounter with his cell phone camera. The footage Chen captured would later provide crucial evidence for understanding the bear's abnormal behavior patterns. The bear's eventual departure from the attack site appeared to be triggered by the arrival of other pack animals that had scattered during the initial encounter. The presence of multiple horses in the area seemed to confuse or distract Bear 747, allowing him to lose interest in pursuing further attacks. Patterson regained consciousness approximately 10 minutes after the bear's departure and was able to provide basic first aid to Thunder, while Chen emerged from hiding to assist with emergency procedures. Patterson's wilderness first responder training proved crucial for stabilizing both himself and his horse until rescue personnel could reach their remote location. Emergency response to the bear attack required coordination between multiple agencies, including Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks, Glacier National Park Service, Flathead County Search and Rescue, and Medical Evacuation Services. The remote location and challenging terrain complicated rescue operations and medical treatment for both human and animal victims. Dr. Tom Harrison, who had participated in Dr. Mitchell's expedition 3 weeks earlier, was working in the emergency department at Kalispell Regional Medical Center when Patterson and Chen arrived by helicopter evacuation. The coincidence provided immediate access to someone familiar with the research area and recent bear activity patterns. Seeing Mike come through those doors brought everything back, Dr. Harrison recalled during later interviews. 3 weeks earlier, we had observed that same bear engaging in what seemed like normal denning behavior. The transformation to predatory aggression was completely unexpected. Patterson's injuries required immediate surgical intervention for the punctured lung and internal bleeding caused by broken ribs, while Chen suffered severe bruising and minor lacerations from his fall when Sunrise bolted. Both men were hospitalized for observation and treatment, with Patterson remaining in intensive care for 48 hours. Thunder's injuries were assessed by veterinary specialists who determined that the horse would survive, but would require extensive treatment and rehabilitation. The attack had resulted in deep lacerations and muscle damage that would prevent Thunder from working as a pack animal for the remainder of the season. The October 17th attack prompted immediate emergency response protocols from Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks, including closure of the Granite Park Chalet area and deployment of specialized bear management personnel to locate and assess Bear 747's condition and behavior patterns. Wildlife officers armed with immobilization equipment and lethal deterrents began systematic tracking of Bear 747, using GPS collar data and ground reconnaissance to determine whether the bear posed continued threats to public safety or could be safely relocated or managed through other means. Dr. Mitchell received authorization to join the emergency response team as a technical advisor, providing expertise about Bear 747's recent behavior patterns and environmental factors that might have contributed to his aggressive encounters with humans. The emergency response team included Captain Jennifer Brooks, wildlife biologist Dr. Amanda Foster, bear management specialist Kevin Martinez, and tracking expert Jake Wilson, along with Dr. Mitchell representing academic research perspectives and recent behavioral observations. GPS collar data indicated that Bear 747 had remained in the general area of the October 17th attack, moving in irregular patterns that suggested continued neurological or metabolic disruption rather than normal post-encounter behavior that would typically involve rapid departure from human contact areas. The movement patterns are completely inconsistent with normal grizzly behavior after human encounters, Dr. Foster explained during team briefings. Healthy bears typically leave the area immediately and avoid human contact for extended periods. This bear is lingering in an area where he just had violent human contact. Ground reconnaissance on October 19th located Bear 747 approximately 3 miles northeast of the attack site, in an area of dense timber that provided concealment while maintaining access to the trail system where human encounters were most likely to occur. Visual observation of Bear 747 through spotting scopes revealed obvious physical and behavioral abnormalities that confirmed suspicions about neurological or metabolic disruption. The bear appeared disoriented, displayed repetitive behaviors, and showed obvious weight loss despite the recent feeding season. "This is not the same animal we observed 3 weeks ago," Dr. Mitchell noted during field observations. The deterioration in physical condition and behavioral patterns suggests serious underlying health issues that may be driving the abnormal aggression. The emergency response team faced complex decisions about management options for Bear 747, balancing public safety concerns against conservation values and scientific understanding of the factors contributing to his behavioral changes. Relocation options were limited by the bear's obvious health problems and the risk that transportation stress might exacerbate neurological issues while potentially exposing other human populations to similar risks if the bear's aggressive behavior continued. Lethal removal remained an option of last resort, but team members recognized that Bear 747's deteriorating condition and history of increasingly aggressive human encounters might make other management options impractical or ineffective for protecting public safety. Dr. Mitchell argued for attempting immobilization and medical assessment to determine whether Bear 747's behavioral changes might be treatable or reversible, while other team members emphasized the immediate risks to public safety and the limited effectiveness of medical treatment for wild grizzlies. The debate about management options was interrupted at 2:15 p.m. on October 19th, when Bear 747 was observed approaching a group of photographers who had illegally entered the closed area to document the killer bear that had become the subject of intense media attention. The photographers, 3 men from Billings who operated a wildlife photography business, had hiked into the closed area despite multiple warning signs and law enforcement barriers, apparently motivated by the commercial value of dramatic bear photography and the publicity surrounding Bear 747's attacks. Bear 747's approach toward the photographers was observed by the emergency response team from a distance of approximately 400 yards, providing unprecedented opportunities to document abnormal bear behavior while creating an immediate crisis that required emergency intervention to prevent additional human casualties. "The bear was stalking them," Jake Wilson observed through binoculars as the encounter developed. "Not displaying, not investigating, not showing normal curiosity." This was predatory behavior directed specifically at humans. Emergency intervention required the response team to create noise and distraction that would divert Bear 747's attention from the photographers, while simultaneously coordinating evacuation procedures for the humans who had placed themselves in extreme danger. Warning shots fired into the air by wildlife officers succeeded in temporarily disrupting Bear 747's approach toward the photographers, but the bear's response was abnormal, even for a startled grizzly. Instead of retreating, Bear 747 displayed increased agitation and appeared to search for the source of the disturbance. The photographer's evacuation required direct intervention by response team members who approached the endangered humans while maintaining constant awareness of Bear 747's location and behavior. The rescue operation exposed multiple people to extreme risk while highlighting the cascade effects of poor decision-making in crisis situations. Bear 747's behavior during the photographer incident convinced the emergency response team that continued management attempts would be ineffective and that public safety required immediate lethal removal of the dangerous animal. Dr. Mitchell's opposition to lethal removal was overruled by consensus among wildlife management personnel who had observed sufficient evidence of Bear 747's deteriorating condition and escalating human aggression to justify immediate action. At 4:45 p.m. on October 19th, Bear 747 was killed by wildlife officers using high-powered rifles after behavioral observations confirmed that the bear posed unacceptable risks to public safety and showed no indication of recovery from whatever medical condition was driving his abnormal aggression. The lethal removal of Bear 747 ended the immediate public safety crisis, but initiated complex investigations into the environmental and management factors that had contributed to the bear's behavioral deterioration and the series of human encounters that resulted in his death. Necropsy examination of Bear 747 revealed extensive neurological damage consistent with chronic wasting disease or similar prion disorders that had never before been documented in grizzly bear populations. The discovery had significant implications for wildlife management and disease monitoring throughout the region. Dr. Mitchell's expedition footage and behavioral observations became crucial evidence for understanding the timeline and progression of Bear 747's disease symptoms, providing insights into how environmental disruption might have accelerated the development of neurological deterioration. The scientific analysis of Bear 747's case required collaboration between wildlife biologists, veterinary pathologists, disease specialists, and environmental researchers to understand the complex factors that had contributed to his abnormal behavior and death. Preliminary findings suggested that climate change disruption of normal denning cycles might have created stress conditions that accelerated the progression of neurological disease, though definitive conclusions required extensive laboratory analysis and comparison with historical disease data. Media coverage of Bear 747's attacks and death created intense public interest in grizzly bear management and the safety of wilderness recreation, with particular attention to the role of climate change in disrupting traditional wildlife behavior patterns. Dr. Mitchell found herself at the center of media attention as the scientist who had most recently observed Bear 747's normal behavior before the onset of his aggressive encounters with humans. Her expedition footage became the primary visual documentation of the bear's pre-disease condition. Television interviews, newspaper articles, and magazine features focused on Dr. Mitchell's perspective about the intersection of climate change, wildlife disease, and public safety in wilderness areas, though the complex scientific issues were often oversimplified for public consumption. The publicity surrounding Bear 747's case led to increased funding for research into wildlife disease monitoring and climate change impacts on traditional animal behavior patterns, though Dr. Mitchell struggled with the personal trauma of witnessing an animal she had studied transform into a deadly threat. Public reaction to Bear 747's case included both support for aggressive wildlife management and criticism of human encroachment into wilderness areas, reflecting broader cultural tensions about the appropriate relationship between humans and potentially dangerous wildlife. Legal proceedings related to Bear 747's attacks included workers' compensation claims by Mike Patterson, liability lawsuits against various government agencies, and insurance disputes about coverage for wildlife-related injuries in commercial outfitting operations. Patterson's recovery from his injuries proved lengthy and complicated, requiring multiple surgeries and extended rehabilitation that prevented him from working for the remainder of the 2024 season. The financial impact on his family and business created additional hardships beyond the physical trauma. Robert Chen's experience during the bear attack led to severe post-traumatic stress disorder that required professional psychological treatment and significantly affected his ability to work and maintain normal daily activities. His lawsuit against multiple agencies sought damages for medical expenses and lost income. The three photographers who illegally entered the closed area faced criminal charges for violation of emergency closure orders and reckless endangerment, though their cases were complicated by questions about the adequacy of warning systems and barrier effectiveness. Insurance companies disputed coverage for various claims related to Bear 747's attacks, arguing that wildlife encounters fell outside standard policy provisions and that some victims had assumed risks by entering known dangerous areas. Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks faced criticism for both their initial response to Bear 747's behavioral changes and their ultimate decision to kill the bear, with different groups arguing that the agency had either acted too slowly or too quickly in addressing the threat. Glacier National Park Service implemented new protocols for monitoring wildlife behavior and communicating risks to visitors, though budget constraints limited the effectiveness of enhanced monitoring and response capabilities. The University of Montana's Institutional Review Board conducted investigations into the research protocols that Dr. Mitchell's expedition had followed, examining whether academic research activities had contributed to Bear 747's behavioral deterioration or the subsequent human encounters. Dr. Mitchell's academic career suffered significant impacts from the publicity and controversy surrounding Bear 747's case, despite scientific evidence that her research had not contributed to the bear's medical condition or aggressive behavior. Professional relationships within the wildlife research community became strained as different scientists took varying positions about the appropriate balance between research objectives and wildlife management concerns in cases involving potentially dangerous animals. Graduate student Lisa Anderson struggled with completing her thesis research after witnessing the transformation of academic wildlife study into life-threatening crisis situations that challenged her commitment to field-based research careers. Marcus Rodriguez's photography and video documentation of Bear 747's normal behavior became valuable scientific and legal evidence, though he also experienced psychological trauma from knowing that the animal he had extensively documented had later become a deadly threat. Dr. Tom Harrison's dual role as expedition participant and emergency room physician who treated Bear 747's attack victims created complex professional and personal conflicts that affected his perspective on wilderness medicine and research ethics. Bear Thompson's reputation as a wilderness guide suffered despite his exemplary safety record, as some potential clients became concerned about the risks of grisly encounters and the effectiveness of traditional bear safety protocols. David Kim returned to his restaurant career, but continued to experience nightmares and anxiety related to his wilderness experiences, particularly the emergency shelter night when the team had been most vulnerable to potential bear encounters. Elena Vasquez incorporated her Bear 747 experiences into her geological research, investigating how environmental changes might create stress conditions that affect wildlife health and behavior patterns across multiple species. Jennifer Walsh's National Geographic story about the expedition and its aftermath became a compelling example of how quickly scientific research could transform into crisis management. Though the article's focus on dramatic events overshadowed some of the important scientific findings, the broader scientific community struggled to understand the implications of Bear 747's case for wildlife research ethics, field safety protocols, and the appropriate response to observations of potentially dangerous animal behavior patterns. 6 months after Bear 747's death, Follow-up research revealed additional cases of neurological disease in grizzly bears throughout the Northern Rockies, suggesting that Bear 747's condition was part of a larger environmental health crisis that required sustained scientific attention. Dr. Mitchell's continued research into the environmental factors contributing to wildlife disease focused on understanding how climate change disruption might create conditions that accelerate disease transmission or progression in wild animal populations. The Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks Department implemented new protocols for monitoring and responding to abnormal wildlife behavior. Though resource limitations prevented comprehensive surveillance of the state's entire grizzly population, Glacier National Park Service developed enhanced visitor education programs about wildlife behavior and safety protocols, emphasizing the unpredictability of animal encounters and the importance of following all safety guidelines and area closures. Insurance industry analysts studied Bear 747's case to understand financial risks associated with wildlife encounters and to develop policy provisions that appropriately allocated responsibility between recreationists, outfitters, and government agencies. Academic institutions reviewed their field research protocols to ensure appropriate balance between scientific objectives and safety considerations, particularly for research involving potentially dangerous wildlife species. The outdoor recreation industry incorporated lessons from Bear 747's attacks into guide training programs and client education materials, emphasizing that even experienced professionals could encounter unpredictable and extremely dangerous wildlife situations. 1 year after the expedition, Dr. Mitchell published her scientific findings about grizzly denning behavior in a peer-reviewed journal, though the academic paper's technical focus contrasted sharply with the dramatic human events that had followed her fieldwork. The scientific data from Dr. Mitchell's expedition contributed to improved understanding of how climate change affects grizzly denning cycles and habitat selection, providing valuable information for long-term conservation planning and management. Bear 747's case became a standard example in wildlife management courses and professional training programs, illustrating the complex intersection of disease, environmental change, and human-wildlife conflict in modern conservation practice. Memorial services for Bear 747 reflected diverse perspectives about the appropriate relationship between humans and potentially dangerous wildlife, with some people mourning the loss of a magnificent animal, while others emphasized the protection of human life and safety. The remote location where Dr. Mitchell's expedition had observed Bear 747's denning behavior became a symbolic site for discussions about wilderness research ethics and the unintended consequences of human presence in sensitive wildlife habitats. Professional counseling services for wildlife researchers and managers expanded to address the psychological trauma associated with witnessing animal behavioral deterioration and the complex ethical decisions involved in wildlife conflict resolution. Dr. Mitchell's personal recovery from the Bear 747 experience required extensive therapy and career adjustments as she struggled to reconcile her love of wildlife research with the knowledge that her academic work had become entangled with violence and death. The broader implications of Bear 747's case continued to influence wildlife management policies, research protocols, and public understanding of the complex challenges facing both humans and wildlife in an era of rapid environmental change. 2 years after the expedition, Dr. Mitchell returned to Glacier National Park for the first time since Bear 747's death, finding that the landscape held both beautiful memories of scientific discovery and painful associations with trauma and loss. The ongoing legacy of Bear 747's case serves as a reminder that wilderness research involves inherent risks and ethical complexities that extend far beyond the immediate scientific objectives of any individual expedition or study. Scientific understanding of wildlife disease and environmental change continues to evolve based partly on the evidence gathered during Dr. Mitchell's expedition and the subsequent investigation of Bear 747's behavioral deterioration and death. The intersection of academic research, wildlife management, and public safety remains a challenging area that requires ongoing attention to balance scientific advancement with protection of both human and animal welfare. Future generations of wildlife researchers and managers will continue to study Bear 747's case as an example of how rapidly environmental conditions can change and how quickly scientific observation can transform into crisis management, requiring difficult decisions about conservation and public safety. The mountains where Dr. Mitchell's expedition observed Bear 747's denning behavior continue to support grizzly bears and other wildlife, though enhanced monitoring and management protocols reflect lessons learned from the tragic transformation of scientific research into human-wildlife conflict. The story of Bear 747 serves as both a scientific case study and a human drama that illustrates the complex relationships between environmental change, wildlife behavior, and human safety in the modern wilderness, reminding us that our interactions with wild animals carry consequences that extend far beyond any individual encounter or research expedition. The next stories. Grizzly kills 68-year-old widow in Garden, June 27, 2025. The morning of June 27, 2025, dawned crisp and clear across the rolling foothills that stretched eastward from Helena, Montana. At 6:47 a.m., the sun crested the Continental Divide, casting long shadows across the patchwork of ranches, subdivisions, and wilderness areas that defined this corner of Lewis and Clark County. The temperature hung at a comfortable 58 degrees, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of pine and wild lupine across the landscape that Margaret Eleanor Lawson had called home for 37 years. Margaret, known to her neighbors as Maggie, had been awake since 5:30 a.m., as was her habit during the growing season. At 68, she moved with the deliberate grace of someone who had spent decades tending to both the land and the people she loved. Her husband, Robert James Lawson, had passed away 14 months earlier from complications related to pancreatic cancer, leaving behind a grief that still caught her at unexpected moments, when she reached for 2 coffee mugs instead of 1, or when she found herself setting aside the choicest tomatoes from her garden for a man who would never again taste her cooking. The Lawson property sat on 12 acres of gently sloping terrain at the end of Whitetail Ridge Road, approximately 8 miles northeast of Helena proper. Their home, a modest 2-story farmhouse built in 1987, occupied a knoll that provided sweeping views across the valley toward the gates of the mountain's wilderness area. The nearest neighbor, the Hendricks family, lived 1/4 mile to the south, while the Kowalski Ranch stretched across several hundred acres to the north and west. To the east, the land climbed steadily toward the Bob Marshall Wilderness Complex, a vast expanse of roadless terrain that harbored one of North America's most robust grizzly bear populations. Robert had chosen this location specifically for its proximity to wild country. A retired Forest Service biologist, he had spent his career studying wildlife corridors and had understood better than most the delicate balance between human development and habitat preservation. The couple had deliberately positioned their home to minimize conflicts with wildlife, installing motion-activated lights, securing all potential food sources, and maintaining clear sightlines around their buildings. Their garden, Maggie's pride and joy, was enclosed within an 8-foot chain-link fence that Robert had reinforced with electric wire after a black bear had destroyed their strawberry patch in 2019. On this particular morning, Maggie moved through her established routine with the fluid efficiency of long practice. She had started her day with coffee and toast while scanning the Helena Independent Record on her tablet, paying particular attention to the wildlife reports that had become increasingly concerning throughout the spring. The Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks Department had documented 17 grizzly bear sightings within a 10-mile radius of her property since early May, including 2 incidents where bears had broken into homes in search of food. The dry winter and late spring had stressed natural food sources, driving bears to seek alternatives in human-inhabited areas. Dr. Sarah Elizabeth Chen, the regional bear biologist for FWP, had been tracking these patterns with growing alarm. A 34-year-old Stanford graduate who had spent 8 years studying grizzly behavior, Dr. Chen understood the mathematical certainty of human-bear conflicts when environmental pressures aligned with demographic factors. The Yellowstone ecosystem grizzly population had reached historic highs, with an estimated 150 to 200 bears now ranging across western Montana. Simultaneously, a severe drought had reduced huckleberry and whitebark pine nut production by 60%, forcing bears to expand their range and alter their traditional foraging patterns. At 7:15 a.m., Maggie stepped outside onto her covered porch, breathing deeply of the mountain air that carried hints of the overnight coolness soon to be burned away by the climbing sun. She wore her standard gardening attire, worn Levi's, a long-sleeved chambray shirt for sun protection, well-broken-in keen hiking boots, and a wide-brimmed straw hat that Robert had bought her for their 25th wedding anniversary. In her left hand, she carried a steaming mug of coffee, black, no sugar, the way she had learned to drink it during her years as a nurse at St. Peter's Hospital. Her right hand held a canvas tote bag containing her gardening tools: hand trowel, pruning shears, a small shovel, and a pair of worn leather gloves. The garden beckoned to her from across 40 yards of mowed lawn, its neat rows promising the abundance that would sustain her through another Montana winter. Tomatoes, peppers, and eggplants filled the southern exposure, while lettuce, spinach, and root vegetables occupied the shadier northern section. Along the eastern fence, her pride, a collection of heritage apple trees that Robert had helped her plant during their first year on the property, stood heavy with developing fruit. She had timed this morning's session to coincide with optimal soil moisture levels following Tuesday evening's brief thunderstorm, planning to transplant seedlings and check for pest damage before the day's heat peaked. What Maggie could not see, as she paused to appreciate the morning's beauty, was the massive form that had been watching her property since before dawn. 800 yards to the northeast, concealed within a grove of lodgepole pines that bordered the national forest boundary, a 600-pound male grizzly bear had been conducting his own morning reconnaissance. The bear, designated as bear number 47 in Dr. Chen's database, was a 22-year-old dominant male with a history of human encounters that dated back 7 years. Bear number 47 had been born in Glacier National Park to a sow known for her aggressive protection of territory and cubs. Weaned earlier than typical due to his mother's death in a territorial dispute, he had learned to survive through opportunistic feeding and calculated risk-taking. His distinctive markings, a silver-tipped coat with distinctive dark patches around his eyes and shoulders, had made him easily recognizable to researchers. More troubling, his behavior profile indicated an unusual willingness to associate human activity with food rewards, a trait that had led to 3 previous relocations and earned him a high-risk classification in FWP files. The bear's presence in this specific location was not coincidental. For the past week, he had been following a scent trail that originated from the Lawson property's compost pile. Despite Maggie's careful adherence to recommended practices, no meat scraps, proper ratios of green to brown material, regular turning to promote decomposition, the organic matter still produced odors detectable by the incredibly sensitive olfactory system that evolution had perfected over millennia. To bear number 47, these scents represented potential sustenance during a season when natural food sources had become increasingly scarce. At 7:23 a.m., Maggie unlocked the gate to her garden enclosure, the metal latch clicking with a sound that carried clearly across the still morning air. She moved with purpose toward the tomato section, where Cherokee purples and brandywines hung heavy on their supports, their deep colors promising the rich flavors that made her famous among friends and neighbors. Her movements were economical and practiced. She bent to examine each plant, checked for hornworms and early blight, and made mental notes about which sections needed additional water. Meanwhile, bear number 47 had begun moving. His initial approach was cautious, following game trails that offered maximum cover while maintaining visual contact with the human activity below. Grizzly bears possess an intelligence that frequently surprises researchers. They can problem solve, adapt their strategies based on experience, and demonstrate planning behaviors that suggest sophisticated cognitive abilities. This particular bear had learned to associate solitary humans with lower risk levels than groups, and his observations over the past several days had established Maggie's routine and confirmed her isolated circumstances. Dr. Jennifer Marie Patterson, a wildlife behaviorist at the University of Montana who had studied bear number 47 during her dissertation research, would later describe his approach strategy as methodical and purposeful. Unlike the chaotic desperation that characterizes a starving bear's behavior, his movements suggested calculated assessment of risk versus reward. He paused frequently to test the wind, ensuring that his scent was not being carried toward his target. His massive paws, each the size of a dinner plate and equipped with 4-inch claws designed for digging roots and tearing apart logs, moved with surprising silence across the forest floor. At 7:31 a.m., Thomas Michael Hendricks, Maggie's closest neighbor, stepped onto his own porch to retrieve the morning newspaper. A 62-year-old retired electrician, Tom had moved to Montana 5 years earlier with his wife, Patricia Lynn Hendricks, seeking the quiet rural lifestyle that had eluded them during their working years in Phoenix. Tom was an early riser by nature, and his elevated position on the adjacent hillside provided clear sightlines across much of the Lawson property. On this morning, however, his attention was focused on the weather forecast in his newspaper, scanning for information about the weekend camping trip he and Patricia had planned for Glacier National Park. The irony of this timing would haunt Tom for months afterward. Had he looked toward Maggie's garden at that precise moment, he might have spotted the massive brown form that was beginning its final approach through the tall grass that bordered the northern edge of her property. Instead, his focus remained on predictions of afternoon thunderstorms and campground availability, mundane concerns that would seem impossibly trivial within the next quarter hour. Bear number 47 had reached the fence line that separated forest from pastoral landscape. Here, he paused for nearly 3 minutes, conducting a final assessment of the situation. His acute hearing detected the steady sounds of human activity, the soft scraping of metal against soil, the rustle of fabric, the occasional soft grunt of effort that accompanied Maggie's work. More importantly, he detected no sounds that suggested the presence of other humans, dogs, or mechanical devices that might complicate his approach. The bear's motivation extended beyond simple hunger. Recent territorial disputes with younger males had forced him to abandon several prime feeding locations, adding stress to an already challenging season. Additionally, a minor injury to his left rear paw, the result of an encounter with a porcupine 3 weeks earlier, had limited his ability to forage efficiently in rocky terrain. The easy calories represented by human food sources had become increasingly attractive as natural alternatives dwindled. Dr. Marcus Robert Sullivan, a bear behavior specialist with 30 years of field experience, would later analyze photographs of bear number 47's tracks and conclude that the animal had been planning this approach for several days. The depth and spacing of his prints suggested deliberate movement rather than wandering, and the convergent pattern of multiple trail systems indicated systematic surveillance of the property. Most troubling, the bear had apparently tested multiple approach routes, demonstrating the kind of strategic thinking that made him particularly dangerous. At 7:37 a.m., Maggie straightened from her work among the tomato plants, pressing her hands against the small of her back to relieve the tension that accumulated during extended periods of bending. The motion lifted her head above the level of the surrounding vegetation, providing her first clear view across the northern section of her property. What she saw in that moment would replay in her memory with crystalline clarity during the terrifying minutes that followed. Initially, she registered only movement, a brown shape that seemed too large and too close to be anything innocuous. Her brain struggled to process the visual information, cycling through possibilities with the rapid-fire assessment that had served her well during decades of nursing crises. Bear. The word formed in her consciousness with absolute certainty, accompanied by a surge of adrenaline that instantly heightened every sense. Bear number 47 had cleared the fence line and was moving directly toward the garden enclosure. His gait was purposeful, but not rushed, the steady, rolling movement of a predator, confident in its dominance. At this distance, roughly 60 yards and closing, his massive size became unmistakable. His shoulder height exceeded 4 feet, and his bulk suggested an animal in prime physical condition despite the seasonal food stresses. Most terrifying, his path was aimed directly at the garden gate through which Maggie had entered less than 15 minutes earlier. The garden's protective fence, designed to exclude deer and smaller animals, offered no meaningful barrier to a determined grizzly. The chain-link construction that had seemed so substantial during installation now appeared pathetically inadequate. The electric wire that had successfully deterred black bears carried insufficient voltage to affect an animal of this size and determination. In later testimony, wildlife experts would confirm that residential bear-proofing measures are designed for deterrence rather than absolute exclusion, effective only when bears lack strong motivation to overcome them. Maggie's first instinct was to call out, hoping to startle the bear away through noise and assertion of human presence. She had attended the workshops that FWP conducted each spring, where residents learned proper protocols for wildlife encounters. Make yourself appear large, make noise, back away slowly, never run, never turn your back. The advice seemed straightforward in a community center classroom, but felt woefully inadequate when faced with 600 pounds of approaching predator. "Hey, bear," she called, her voice carrying a tremor that undermined her attempt at authoritative deterrence. "Hey, bear, go away!" The words seemed to disappear into the vastness of the morning air, producing no discernible effect on the animal's approach. If anything, the sound seemed to focus his attention more directly on her location within the garden enclosure. Bear number 47's response to her vocalizations would become a subject of intense analysis among wildlife behaviorists. Rather than exhibiting the startled response typical of most bear encounters, he continued his approach with what Dr. Patterson would later describe as predatory persistence. His ears remained forward rather than laid back, his head was held high in an alert posture, and his movements showed no sign of the stress behaviors, huffing, jaw-popping or swaying, that usually precede defensive aggression. These were the behaviors of an animal acting on calculated intent rather than surprise or fear. At 7:39 a.m., Patricia Hendricks emerged from her kitchen with a fresh cup of coffee, intending to join her husband on their porch for their traditional morning discussion of the day's plans. A 60-year-old former elementary school teacher with the acute observational skills that profession demands, Patricia's gaze swept automatically across the familiar landscape that had become their sanctuary. What she saw sent her coffee mug crashing to the wooden porch planks. "Tom!" she screamed, her voice carrying the kind of absolute terror that can only emerge from witnessing imminent catastrophe. "Tom! Call 911. There's a bear attacking Maggie." Tom Hendricks dropped his newspaper and followed his wife's pointing finger across the valley. The scene that met his eyes seemed to unfold in slow motion, each detail etching itself permanently into his memory. The massive grizzly had reached the garden fence and was testing it with his front paws, clearly assessing the barrier between himself and his target. Maggie stood frozen among her tomato plants, approximately 30 feet from the gate that represented her only exit from the enclosure. The geometric reality of the situation became immediately apparent to Tom's electrician-trained mind. The garden formed a rough rectangle approximately 40 feet by 60 feet, enclosed on all sides by 8-foot fencing. The single gate, positioned in the southwest corner for convenience during construction, now represented a fatal bottleneck. For Maggie to reach safety, she would need to cross the open space where the bear could easily intercept her, then manipulate the latch mechanism while under direct threat. The math was simple and terrifying. She could not win a race against an animal capable of sprinting at 35 miles per hour. "Patricia, get inside and call 911, Tom shouted, already moving toward his truck parked in their driveway. "Tell them we need fish and wildlife and emergency medical. Now!" His voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to managing crisis situations, though nothing in his experience had prepared him for wildlife emergency response. Patricia fumbled with her cell phone, her hands shaking so violently that she missed the emergency number twice before successfully connecting. The Lewis and Clark County 911 dispatcher, Jennifer Marie Foster, answered on the second ring with her standard professional greeting. What she heard in response would launch the most complex wildlife emergency response in the county's recorded history. 911, this is Patricia Hendricks at 47 Whitetail Ridge Road. "There's a grizzly bear attacking my neighbor, Margaret Lawson. She's trapped in her garden and the bear is right there. We need help immediately." Dispatcher Foster, a 15-year veteran who had handled everything from medical emergencies to structure fires, recognized the unique challenges of wildlife encounters. Lewis and Clark County maintained specific protocols for bear incidents, reflecting the realities of life in grizzly habitat. Her response demonstrated the coordination required when multiple agencies shared jurisdiction over different aspects of the crisis. "Ma'am, I'm dispatching deputies and emergency medical services immediately. Can you see the victim now? Is she injured?" "She's still standing," Patricia reported, her voice breaking with emotion, "but the bear is testing the fence. I think it's going to get in." At 7:41 a.m., bear number 47 made his first physical contact with the garden fence. Rather than attempting to climb or break through the chain-link construction, he moved systematically along the perimeter, testing different sections for weakness. His behavior suggested familiarity with human barriers and an understanding that they often contained access points designed for human convenience. Wildlife biologists had documented this type of problem-solving behavior in other grizzlies, but witnessing it in real time emphasized the terrifying intelligence of apex predators. Maggie watched the bear's reconnaissance with growing desperation. Her nursing background had taught her to assess situations quickly and develop action plans under pressure, but this scenario offered no medical intervention that could alter the outcome. Her options were limited and terrible: remain motionless and hope the bear lost interest, attempt to reach the gate before the bear found his entry point, or create enough disturbance to attract help from neighbors she could not see. The bear's systematic approach to the fence problem demonstrated why bear number 47 had survived territorial disputes and resource competition that eliminated less adaptable animals. At the northeast corner of the enclosure, where wind and weather had loosened one of the fence posts, he discovered a section that yielded slightly under pressure. Rather than forcing immediate entry, he continued his circuit, apparently cataloguing all available options before committing to action. This behavioral pattern would later become crucial evidence in the post-incident investigation. Dr. Chen's analysis of the scene would reveal that bear number 47 had identified 3 potential entry points during his initial reconnaissance: the compromised northeast corner, a section of fence near the compost pile where repeated impact from falling fruit had created slight deformation, and the gate itself. His methodical evaluation suggested an animal making tactical decisions rather than acting on impulse. At 7:42 a.m., Deputy Marshal Daniel Patrick O'Brien of the Lewis and Clark County Sheriff's Department received the emergency dispatch while patrolling Highway 12, approximately 6 miles from the incident location. An 8-year veteran with extensive training in wildlife encounters, Deputy O'Brien understood the complex dynamics of bear response scenarios. His immediate concern was reaching the scene quickly enough to affect the outcome while avoiding actions that might escalate an already dangerous situation. Dispatch, this is Unit 47. I'm en route to Whitetail Ridge Road with an estimated arrival time of 12 minutes. Contact Fish and Wildlife and request immediate response. Also alert emergency medical services that this will likely be a trauma situation requiring helicopter transport. His radio transmission reflected the grim mathematics of rural emergency response. Even with optimal conditions, help was still too far away to prevent an attack in progress. The nearest Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks Enforcement Officer, Warden Rebecca Lynn Martinez, was conducting a routine patrol in the Gates of the Mountains area when she received the emergency notification. A 10-year veteran with specialized training in dangerous wildlife encounters Warden Martinez understood that her response would likely involve post-incident investigation rather than active intervention. Her immediate priority was coordinating resources and ensuring that arriving personnel had access to the specialized equipment and expertise required for grizzly bear incidents. Dispatch, this is FWP Unit 23. I'm approximately 15 minutes from location. Request that life flight be placed on standby and contact Dr. Chen at headquarters for immediate response. This situation will require tranquilizer equipment and a full investigation team. Her calm, professional tone masked the urgency she felt, knowing that every minute of delay increased the likelihood of a fatal outcome. Back at the scene, Tom Hendricks had reached his truck and was racing down his driveway toward the county road. His plan was born of desperation rather than strategy. Drive to the Lawson property, use his vehicle to create noise and distraction, and hope to disrupt the bear's focus long enough for Maggie to escape. The plan's flaws were obvious even to Tom, but inaction felt like collaboration with tragedy. Bear number 47 had completed his circuit of the garden fence and returned to the northeast corner, where his initial test had revealed weakness. This time, his application of force was decisive rather than exploratory. 600 pounds of muscle and bone, concentrated through leverage and determination, proved more than adequate to overcome residential fencing never designed to contain apex predators. The fence post tilted inward with a grinding sound of metal against gravel, creating a gap sufficient for the bear's massive frame. The sound of the fence failure galvanized Maggie into action. Her paralysis broke in an instant of clarity that revealed her only chance lay in immediate movement toward the gate. She abandoned her gardening tools and began running across the garden rows, her hiking boots slipping slightly on the damp soil as she navigated between vegetable plants that represented hours of careful cultivation. Behind her, she could hear the bear forcing his way through the gap he had created, the sound of chain-link fence scraping against his thick coat. Dr. Patricia Marie Williams, a trauma surgeon at St. Peter's Hospital who would later treat the injuries sustained in this incident, would observe that survival in wildlife attacks often depends on decisions made in fractions of seconds. The difference between life and death frequently comes down to factors beyond human control. The exact distance to safety, the terrain conditions underfoot, the specific behavior patterns of individual animals. In Maggie's case, her decision to run represented both her best option and a trigger for the bear's predatory response. Bear number 47's entry into the garden enclosure marked the transition from surveillance to active hunting. The confined space eliminated Maggie's options while favoring the bear's superior speed and agility. Once inside the fence, the bear's behavior shifted from methodical assessment to focused pursuit. His massive frame, moved with the fluid efficiency of a predator, evolved for exactly this type of encounter, the pursuit and capture of prey in confined spaces. At 7:44 a.m., Maggie reached the garden gate with bear number 47, approximately 15 feet behind her and closing rapidly. The gate's latch mechanism, designed for human hands and operated thousands of times during routine garden maintenance, suddenly became a complex puzzle requiring fine motor control under extreme stress. Her fingers, trembling with adrenaline and fear, struggled with the simple metal clasp that had never seemed complicated until this moment when her life depended on its operation. The bear's approach was accompanied by sounds that would haunt the witnesses for years afterward. Unlike the roaring depicted in movies, bear number 47's vocalizations consisted of low, huffing sounds interspersed with what Dr. Patterson would later describe as purposeful breathing. These were not the sounds of an angry animal, but of one working hard to close distance with his target. His massive paws struck the ground with impacts that Maggie could feel through the soles of her boots. Patricia Hendricks, still on the phone with emergency dispatch, provided a running commentary that would become part of the official record. "She's at the gate. She's trying to get out. The bear is right behind her. Oh God, she's having trouble with the latch." The gate latch finally yielded to Maggie's desperate manipulation, swinging open with a metallic squeal that seemed impossibly loud in the morning stillness. For one moment, escape seemed possible. The open gate represented a clear path to her house, 40 yards of mowed lawn, across which she might outrun her pursuer long enough to reach the safety of locked doors and telephone contact with emergency services. But bear number 47 had anticipated this moment. Rather than pursuing directly behind Maggie through the garden rows, he had angled his approach to intercept her at the gate. As she burst through the opening, he was there waiting, his massive form blocking her path to safety with the calculated positioning of an experienced predator. The trap that had seemed like salvation became instead the final convergence of hunter and prey. Tom Hendricks, now speeding along Whitetail Ridge Road in his pickup truck, saw the critical moment unfold from approximately 300 yards away. Later, he would describe the scene as surreal. The bright morning sunshine, the pastoral beauty of the landscape, and at the center of it all, a scene of prehistoric violence that seemed impossible in the modern world. His truck's engine roared as he accelerated, horn blaring continuously in a desperate attempt to create enough disturbance to alter the outcome. The collision between Maggie and bear number 47 occurred at 7:45 a.m., according to multiple synchronized timepieces. Unlike the dramatic battles depicted in entertainment media, the encounter was over almost before witnesses could process what they were seeing. Bear number 47's front paw struck Maggie with the force of a sledgehammer swing, the impact audible to Patricia Hendricks 300 yards away. The blow sent Maggie tumbling across the gravel path that bordered her garden, her body rolling limply in a way that suggested immediate unconsciousness or worse. Dr. Michael James Peterson, an emergency medicine physician who would later review the incident, explained that bear attacks typically involve massive, blunt force trauma rather than the clean wounds associated with other wildlife encounters. A grizzly bear's paw strike delivers force equivalent to being hit by a compact car at moderate speed. The human body simply isn't designed to withstand that level of impact. Unconsciousness is often immediate, which may be merciful given what follows. Bear number 47's behavior following the initial attack would become a focal point of behavioral analysis. Rather than immediately beginning to feed, as might be expected from a food-motivated bear, he grasped Maggie's unconscious form in his jaws and began dragging her toward the tree line. This behavior suggested either territorial instincts, removing the threat from his claimed area, or possessive behavior associated with protecting a food resource from potential competitors. Tom Hendricks arrived at the scene as the bear began this dragging behavior. His pickup truck skidded to a stop near the garden gate, and he immediately began blaring his horn and shouting while remaining inside the vehicle. His actions reflected the training provided in community wildlife awareness programs. Create maximum disturbance while maintaining personal safety. The strategy sometimes worked with black bears, but was less reliable with grizzlies, particularly those already committed to aggressive behavior. "Get away from her!" Tom screamed, his voice breaking with emotion and terror. "Get away! Go on! Get out of here!" He laid on the horn continuously, creating a cacophony that echoed across the valley and alerted neighbors for miles around that something terrible was happening at the Lawson property. The bear's response to Tom's arrival demonstrated the complex decision-making that makes grizzly bears particularly dangerous. Rather than fleeing immediately, bear number 47 paused to assess this new threat. He maintained his grip on Maggie while turning to face the truck, apparently calculating whether this disturbance represented sufficient danger to abandon his prize. His behavior during these crucial seconds would later be analyzed, frame by frame, from security camera footage that captured the scene from multiple angles. Patricia Hendricks continued her emergency dispatch communication, her voice becoming increasingly frantic as she witnessed the attack's aftermath. "The bear hit her. She's down. It's dragging her toward the trees. My husband is there, but he can't get close. Where are the police? Where is everyone?" Dispatcher Foster maintained her professional demeanor while coordinating an increasingly complex emergency response. "Ma'am, deputies are en route with an estimated arrival time of 8 minutes. I need you to tell your husband to stay in his vehicle. Do not approach the bear under any circumstances. Emergency medical services are standing by. At 7:47 a.m., Doctor." Sarah Chen received the emergency notification while reviewing overnight tracking data at the FWP regional headquarters in Helena. As the region's lead bear biologist, she understood immediately that this incident represented the escalation she had been dreading since spring wildlife monitoring began. The combination of drought stress, high grizzly population density, and increasing human development in traditional bear habitat had created conditions ripe for exactly this type of encounter. This is Dr. Chen responding to the Whitetail Ridge incident. I'm en route with tranquilizer equipment and a full response team. Contact the hospital and advise them to prepare for massive trauma. Also notify the governor's office. This is going to require a full incident investigation and probable policy review. Her calm, scientific tone reflected years of training in crisis management, but her hands trembled slightly as she gathered the specialized equipment required for grizzly bear intervention. Bear number 47's deliberation at the scene lasted approximately 90 seconds, an eternity for the witnesses, but typical behavior for a bear evaluating multiple threats. Tom's continued horn-blowing and shouting had created significant auditory stress, but the bear apparently concluded that the truck represented less immediate danger than abandoning his prize would represent opportunity cost. His decision to continue dragging Maggie toward the forest edge demonstrated the kind of calculated risk assessment that had enabled his survival in competitive grizzly habitat. The dragging phase of the attack would later become the most analyzed aspect of the entire incident. Security cameras from the Hendricks property captured clear footage of bear number 47's technique, which wildlife experts described as surprisingly gentle for such a massive predator. Rather than the savage mauling often depicted in media accounts, the bear's transport method suggested behavior more consistent with moving cubs or protecting food sources. This distinction would become crucial in determining the bear's motivation and informing future prevention strategies. Deputy O'Brien's radio crackled with updates as he raced toward the scene. Unit 47, be advised that life flight has been notified and is spinning up. Emergency medical services are staging at the intersection of Whitetail Ridge Road and Highway 12. Fish and Wildlife is en route with specialized equipment. Approach with extreme caution. We have an active bear attack in progress. The deputy's training had included specific protocols for wildlife emergencies, but the reality of responding to an active grizzly attack involved complexities that no training could fully address. His primary responsibility was scene safety and coordination with specialized personnel, but the urgency of potential life-saving intervention created pressure to take action beyond his expertise. The balance between helping and escalating an already dangerous situation required split-second decisions with life-or-death consequences. At 7:49 a.m., bear number 47 reached the tree line that marked the boundary between the Lawson property and the National Forest. Here, he paused again, apparently reassessing his options in light of the continued disturbance from Tom's truck. The bear's position among the trees provided concealment while maintaining visual contact with the human activity below. His behavior suggested an animal comfortable with making tactical decisions under pressure, a trait that made him particularly dangerous in human encounter situations. Maggie's condition during this phase remained unknown to the witnesses. Her body showed no obvious signs of movement, and the distance made detailed assessment impossible. However, emergency medical personnel later noted that survival during the initial phases of bear attacks often depends on the victim remaining unconscious, as movement or vocalizations can trigger additional aggressive behavior. In this case, Maggie's unconscious state may have prevented even more severe injuries during the dragging phase. Tom Hendricks faced an agonizing decision as he watched the bear disappear into the forest with his neighbor. His continuing presence at the scene served no immediate tactical purpose, but abandoning Maggie felt like personal cowardice. His radio communication with emergency dispatch reflected this internal conflict. This is Tom Hendricks at the scene. The bear has taken her into the woods. I can't see them anymore. What do I do? I can't just leave her. The Emergency Coordination Center was simultaneously managing multiple agency responses while maintaining real-time communication with witnesses. Dispatcher Foster's calm voice provided the anchor of professionalism that kept the situation from descending into chaos. Mr. Hendricks, I need you to maintain your position and continue providing updates. Do not leave your vehicle or attempt to follow the bear. Professional wildlife personnel are en route. Dr. Chen's response team was now traveling at emergency speeds toward the incident location, their vehicle loaded with specialized equipment that most residents never realized existed. Tranquilizer guns capable of safely immobilizing a 600-pound bear, tracking equipment to locate animals in dense forest, and medical supplies designed for wilderness trauma situations. The team's capability was impressive, but their effectiveness depended entirely on reaching the scene while intervention remained possible. At 7:52 a.m., the sound of sirens became audible across the valley as Deputy O'Brien's patrol car crested the hill leading to Whitetail Ridge Road. The deputy's arrival represented the first professional emergency response to reach the scene, though his effectiveness against a grizzly bear remained limited by both training and equipment. His immediate priority was scene assessment and witness coordination, while specialized personnel completed their response. Bear number 47's behavior among the trees would later be reconstructed through forensic analysis of the scene. Rather than immediately beginning to consume his victim, the bear appeared to engage in caching behavior, attempting to conceal Maggie's body while assessing the continuing threat from human activity. This behavior pattern suggested an animal planning for extended possession of his prize rather than immediate consumption, a distinction that would prove crucial for rescue timing. Tom Hendricks watched Deputy O'Brien's patrol car arrive with a mixture of relief and frustration. Professional help had finally reached the scene, but the bear and Maggie remained hidden in the forest, where conventional law enforcement had no meaningful capability to intervene. The deputy's first actions, establishing radio contact with the Emergency Coordination Center and beginning scene documentation, seemed inadequate responses to the life-or-death crisis unfolding in the woods. Deputy O'Brien, on scene at 47 Whitetail Ridge Road. I have one witness in a vehicle maintaining safe distance from the incident area. The bear has dragged the victim into the tree line approximately 50 yards north of the garden area. No visual contact with either the animal or the victim at this time. Requesting immediate ETA on Fish and Wildlife response. The radio response carried news that provided both hope and urgency. Unit 47, Fish and Wildlife, is approximately 4 minutes out with full response capability. Life flight is airborne and will be on scene in 12 minutes. Emergency medical services is standing by. Maintain scene security and do not approach the wooded area. Tanya Patricia Hendricks had moved inside her house at her husband's radioed instruction, but she maintained visual surveillance of the scene through her kitchen window. Her continued communication with emergency dispatch provided the real-time intelligence that would guide the professional response. I can see the deputy talking to my husband. There's no movement in the trees where the bear went. How long before someone can help her? The question highlighted the cruel mathematics of wilderness emergency response. Even with optimal coordination and immediate availability of specialized resources, the timeline for intervention in bear attacks often exceeds the window for meaningful medical intervention. Dr. Peterson's later analysis would note that survival rates in grizzly attacks dropped dramatically after the first 10 minutes due to the compound effects of trauma, blood loss, and exposure. At 7:55 a.m., Dr. Chen's response team arrived at the scene with equipment and expertise specifically designed for this type of emergency. The team included Dr. Chen herself, armed with a high-powered tranquilizer rifle loaded with sufficient immobilization drugs to safely subdue a large grizzly, Warden Martinez with backup tranquilizer equipment and wildlife tracking tools, and emergency medical technician James Robert Wilson, whose wilderness trauma training made him uniquely qualified to provide immediate medical care in this environment. The team's arrival transformed the incident from a helpless witnessing of tragedy to an active rescue operation. Dr. Chen's first assessment involved determining the bear's current location and behavioral state, critical information for planning a safe approach to the victim. Her years of experience with aggressive grizzlies had taught her that successful interventions required understanding the animal's psychological state, rather than simply overwhelming it with force. "We have 3 priorities," Dr. Chen explained to the assembled responders. "First, locate and immobilize the bear safely. Second, provide immediate medical attention to the victim. Third, ensure scene safety for all personnel. This bear has demonstrated human-directed aggression, which makes him extremely dangerous to approach. We'll use thermal imaging to locate his position before attempting any intervention." The thermal imaging equipment revealed what conventional surveillance could not: heat signatures that precisely located both bear number 47 and Maggie among the dense forest cover. The images showed the bear positioned approximately 8 feet from Maggie's location, apparently resting but maintaining vigilant awareness of the human activity below. Most encouragingly, Maggie's thermal signature showed signs of life, body heat patterns consistent with an unconscious but living person. Dr. Chen's tactical analysis considered factors that would never occur to civilian observers. Wind direction affected scent dispersal, which could influence the bear's awareness of the approaching response team. Terrain features determined sightlines and approach routes that would minimize detection while maximizing shooting accuracy. Most critically, the bear's behavioral state, resting versus actively feeding versus preparing to relocate, would determine the timing and method of intervention. The bear appears to be in a possessive guarding mode, Dr. Chen reported to the coordination center. He's positioned himself where he can monitor threats while maintaining control of the victim. This is actually advantageous for our purposes. He's stationary and predictable. We're going to approach from the southwest, using the terrain to mask our movement until we're within effective tranquilizer range. EMT Wilson prepared his trauma response equipment while the wildlife team planned their approach. His medical assessment would begin the moment the bear was safely immobilized, but his preparation now could determine whether advanced life support measures would be available immediately or delayed by equipment failures. The specialized wilderness medical kit included trauma supplies designed for massive bleeding, spinal immobilization equipment adapted for forest transport, and communication gear to coordinate with the incoming life flight helicopter. At 8:01 a.m., Dr. Chen and Warden Martinez began their approach to bear number 47's position. Their movement was informed by decades of combined experience with dangerous wildlife and an understanding of grizzly bear sensory capabilities that most people never appreciate. Bears can detect human scent at distances exceeding a mile under favorable conditions, and their hearing rivals that of dogs. The approach required moving upwind while minimizing noise and visual disruption that might trigger a defensive or aggressive response. Tom Hendricks watched the wildlife professionals disappear into the forest with emotions that combined hope, fear, and helplessness. His role in the unfolding drama had been reduced to witness and bystander, but his intimate knowledge of Maggie and the property provided information that could prove crucial. His radio communication with Deputy O'Brien helped establish timeline and behavioral details that would guide both the immediate rescue and the subsequent investigation. "Maggie's been gardening in that spot for over 30 years, Tom explained. "She knows bear safety better than anyone. If this bear approached her directly, it wasn't normal behavior. She would have seen it coming and known what to do. Something's different about this animal." Tom's observation would later prove prophetic. Bear number 47's behavioral profile indicated an animal that had learned to associate human activity with food rewards, a conditioning process that gradually erodes the natural wariness that keeps most grizzlies away from human habitats. The bear's systematic approach to the garden, His methodical evaluation of barriers and his persistent pursuit, despite human presence, all suggested an animal whose behavioral patterns had been altered by previous positive reinforcement. Dr. Chen's approach team reached their planned position approximately 40 yards from Bear, number 47's location, at 8:06 a.m. From this distance, the tranquilizer rifle's accuracy was assured, but the team's presence remained undetected by the bear. The thermal imaging confirmed that Maggie was still alive but unconscious, her body positioned where the bear had dragged her behind a fallen log that provided concealment from the human activity below. The shot placement for a grizzly bear tranquilization requires precision that exceeds most hunting situations. The drug must be delivered to muscle tissue capable of absorbing the chemical efficiently while avoiding vital organs that could be damaged by the injection itself. Dr. Chen's target area was the bear's hindquarter, where large muscle groups would facilitate rapid drug absorption while minimizing risk of serious injury from the dart impact. Bear number 47's position among the trees provided a clear shot angle, but his alertness level required careful timing. The bear's head was raised in a monitoring posture, his attention focused on the human activity around the Lawson property. Dr. Chen waited for a moment when his position would provide optimal dart placement while his attention was directed away from the approach team's location. At 8:08 a.m., Dr. Chen fired the tranquilizer dart. The compressed air rifle produced only a soft pneumatic sound, but the dart's impact was immediately apparent. Bear number 47 spun toward the injection site with the lightning reflexes that make grizzlies so dangerous in close encounters. For a moment, the bear's attention focused on the dart protruding from his hindquarter, his massive paw swatting at the foreign object with surprising dexterity. The bear's response to the tranquilizer injection would become a textbook example of grizzly bear behavior under chemical restraint. Rather than immediately succumbing to the drugs, bear number 47 displayed the kind of determined resistance that makes these animals so formidable. He attempted to remove the dart, moved restlessly around Maggie's location, and maintained vigilant awareness of potential threats. The drugs would require several minutes to achieve full effectiveness, during which the bear remained dangerous and unpredictable. E.M.T. Wilson monitored the situation from the edge of the tree line. His medical equipment prepared for immediate deployment once scene safety was assured. His visual assessment of Maggie's condition from 40 yards suggested serious trauma, but no obvious signs of active bleeding that would indicate immediately life-threatening injuries. However, the limitations of distant observation meant that critical internal injuries could remain undetected until hands-on examination became possible. Dr. Chen's radio communication provided updates to the coordination center while she monitored the tranquilizer's effects. Dart placement successful. Bear is showing initial drug response but remains mobile and alert. Estimate 3 to 5 minutes before safe approach to victim. Life flight should be prepared for immediate transport upon our signal. The life flight helicopter, piloted by Captain Sarah Michelle Torres and carrying flight nurse David Allen Richardson and flight paramedic Lisa Marie Anderson, had been circling the area at safe distance while awaiting clearance to land. The crew's preparation included reviewing the limited medical information available about the victim and planning for the type of wilderness extraction that represents one of the most challenging scenarios in emergency medicine. At 8:12 a.m., bear number 47's movements began showing the uncoordinated patterns that indicated effective drug absorption. His massive frame swayed slightly as he moved, and his responses to environmental stimuli became noticeably delayed. Dr. Chen's assessment indicated that safe approach would be possible within another 2 minutes. allowing EMT Wilson to begin his life-saving intervention. The bear's gradual immobilization revealed details about Maggie's condition that had been impossible to assess from distance. Her position behind the fallen log had protected her from additional injury during the dragging phase, and her clothing showed less damage than might be expected from a prolonged attack. Most encouragingly, her chest showed the regular rise and fall that indicated stable respiratory function. Warden Martinez maintained overwatch with a backup tranquilizer rifle, while Dr. Chen monitored bear number 47's sedation level. The bear's massive form finally settled into the deep unconsciousness that would allow safe victim access, his breathing deep and regular in the pattern of chemically induced sleep. The immobilization drugs would provide approximately 45 minutes of safe working time before requiring additional doses. At 8:14 a.m., EMT Wilson began his approach to Maggie's location. His movement was cautious, despite the bear's unconscious state. Wildlife professionals understand that tranquilized animals can sometimes recover with surprising speed, particularly when stimulated by noise or disturbance. His medical assessment would need to be rapid but thorough, determining Maggie's transportability while preparing her for helicopter evacuation. Wilson's initial assessment revealed injuries consistent with massive blunt force trauma, followed by careful transport. Maggie's left arm showed obvious deformation, suggesting multiple fractures, and her facial injuries indicated significant impact damage. However, her vital signs, pulse, blood pressure, and respiratory function, remained within ranges compatible with survival if immediate medical intervention could address the compound trauma. "I have a pulse of 110, blood pressure 90/60, respiration 16, and regular," Wilson reported via radio. "Multiple obvious fractures, significant facial trauma, possible internal injuries. She's unconscious but stable for transport. Request immediate life flight landing for emergency evacuation." The medical team's assessment confirmed what Tom Hendricks had feared and hoped. Maggie had survived the initial attack, but required immediate surgical intervention to address her injuries. The compound nature of her trauma meant that multiple specialties would be required: orthopedic surgery for her fractures, plastic surgery for facial reconstruction, and neurosurgery to evaluate potential brain injuries from the massive impact. Life flight's landing in the Lawson Properties pasture occurred at 8:18 a.m., the helicopter's rotor wash creating a windstorm that sent garden debris swirling across the scene. The crew's efficiency reflected years of wilderness rescue experience, their movements coordinated and purposeful as they prepared for the most challenging phase of the operation, transporting a critically injured patient from dense forest to advanced medical care. The evacuation of Maggie from bear number 47's location required careful coordination between medical and wildlife personnel. EMT Wilson supervised spinal immobilization and trauma stabilization, while Dr. Chen monitored the sedated bear for any signs of premature recovery. The patient transport equipment, specialized lightweight stretchers designed for wilderness evacuation, allowed the team to navigate the forest terrain while maintaining medical protocols. At 8:25 a.m., Maggie was loaded aboard the Life Flight helicopter, her unconscious form secured within the aircraft's medical bay, where Flight Nurse Richardson could provide advanced life support during transport to St. Peter's Hospital. The helicopter's immediate departure marked the transition from rescue operation to criminal investigation, as the scene was secured for the detailed forensic analysis that would determine bear number 47's ultimate fate. Dr. Chen's post-immobilization examination of bear number 47 revealed details that would prove crucial to understanding the attack's motivation and planning future prevention strategies. The bear's excellent physical condition suggested that hunger alone had not motivated his aggressive behavior. More troubling, examination of his teeth and claws showed evidence of previous human contact. fabric fibers and synthetic materials that indicated prior raids on human food sources. This bear has been conditioned to associate human activity with food rewards, Dr. Chen reported to the investigation team that was already assembling. His excellent physical condition rules out starvation as a motivating factor. This was learned behavior that escalated to human-directed aggression. We're dealing with a habituated bear that poses ongoing public safety threats. The implications of this assessment extended far beyond the immediate incident. Bear number 47's behavioral profile indicated that relocation, the standard response to problem bears, would likely prove ineffective. His conditioning to human food sources would continue to drive aggressive behavior regardless of location, potentially placing other communities at risk. The difficult decision regarding his ultimate disposition would require input from multiple agencies and consideration of public safety factors that extended beyond individual sympathy for wildlife. Tom and Patricia Hendricks, finally released from their role as witnesses, drove to St. Peter's Hospital to await news of Maggie's condition. Their relationship with Maggie had evolved from neighborly courtesy to genuine friendship during the 14 months since Robert's death, and her well-being had become a personal concern that transcended mere community obligation. The couple's presence in the hospital waiting room represented the kind of rural solidarity that defines small communities facing crisis. The media response to the incident began within hours of the emergency calls, as local television and newspaper reporters monitored emergency radio frequencies for developing stories. The combination of wildlife attack, rural drama, and rescue operation created compelling content that would attract regional and eventually national attention. The story's human interest elements, a widowed grandmother attacked in her garden, heroic neighbors, and professional rescue workers, provided narrative components that ensured extensive coverage. Dr. Patricia Williams, the trauma surgeon who received Maggie upon her arrival at St. Peter's Hospital, understood immediately that she was dealing with injuries unlike anything in her urban emergency medicine experience. Bear attack trauma involved massive blunt force, combined with puncture wounds and tissue damage that required specialized surgical techniques. Her team's preparation included consulting with colleagues at trauma centers in Alaska and Western Canada, where grizzly attack treatment represented a recognized medical specialty. The patient presents with multiple compound fractures of the left arm, significant facial trauma with possible orbital fractures, and suspected internal injuries requiring immediate surgical exploration, Dr. Williams reported to the surgical team, assembling for what would become an 8-hour operation. This is going to require orthopedic, plastic, and general surgery coordination. We need to prep for the possibility of multiple procedures over several days. Bear number 47's fate remained under discussion as wildlife officials, law enforcement, and public safety administrators evaluated the legal and practical options available under Montana wildlife management protocols. The bear's behavioral profile indicated clear public safety threats that would persist regardless of relocation efforts. However, the emotional and political considerations surrounding wildlife management decisions required careful evaluation of alternatives before committing to lethal control measures. Dr. Chen's behavioral assessment provided the scientific foundation for these discussions. This bear has demonstrated systematic, human-directed aggression combined with learned behavior that associates human activity with food rewards. Relocation will not address the underlying conditioning that drove this attack. Public safety considerations must take precedence over individual animal welfare when dealing with confirmed human-aggressive bears. The investigation phase of the incident involved multiple agencies with overlapping jurisdictions and conflicting priorities. The Lewis and Clark County Sheriff's Department handled the criminal investigation aspects, though no human criminal activity was suspected. Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks conducted the wildlife behavior analysis that would determine bear number 47's disposition. The Montana Department of Agriculture investigated potential attractants on the Lawson property that might have contributed to the incident. Preliminary findings indicated that the Lawson property had been maintained according to recommended bear-proofing standards. The compost pile that had initially attracted bear number 47's attention was properly constructed and positioned according to FWP guidelines. The garden's protective fencing exceeded standard recommendations for wildlife exclusion. Most significantly, no evidence suggested that intentional or negligent feeding had occurred on the property. This appears to be a case of a habituated bear seeking food sources in an area where proper precautions had been taken, Warden Martinez reported to the investigating committee. The victim followed established protocols but encountered an animal whose behavioral patterns had been altered by prior conditioning experiences. This represents a failure of the larger wildlife management system rather than individual negligence. The community response to the incident reflected the complex emotions that wildlife attacks generate in rural areas where human-animal coexistence remains a daily reality. Support for Maggie was universal, but opinions regarding bear number 47's fate divided along lines that reflected different philosophies about wildlife management, human responsibility, and the practical realities of living in grizzly habitat. Local resident meetings conducted by FWP in the weeks following the attack revealed the deep concerns that such incidents generate about public safety and wildlife management effectiveness. The statistical reality that bear attacks remain extremely rare provided little comfort to neighbors who now questioned the safety of routine outdoor activities. The psychological impact of the incident extended far beyond the immediate victim to include the broader community that shared the landscape with apex predators. Dr. Chen's public presentations during these meetings emphasized the importance of understanding bear behavior rather than fearing all wildlife encounters. This incident involved an individual animal whose behavior had been altered by specific conditioning experiences. The vast majority of bears in our area continue to avoid human contact and pose no direct threat. However, this incident does highlight the importance of maintaining proper food storage and reporting unusual bear behavior before it escalates to aggressive encounters. The legal proceedings surrounding the incident involved multiple jurisdictions and agencies, each with specific responsibilities and authorities. The Sheriff's Department investigation concluded that no criminal activity had occurred, clearing the way for FWP to make wildlife management decisions based purely on scientific and public safety considerations. The Montana Department of Justice provided legal review of the proposed management actions to ensure compliance with both state and federal wildlife protection statutes. Bear number 47's ultimate fate was determined through a collaborative decision-making process that considered scientific evidence, public safety requirements, and legal constraints. The bear's behavioral profile, combined with the severity of his human-directed aggression, led to the conclusion that lethal control represented the only viable option for protecting public safety. The decision was announced publicly with detailed explanation of the factors that precluded relocation or other management alternatives. The decision to euthanize bear number 47 was not made lightly, Dr. Chen announced at a public meeting 3 weeks after the attack. This animal demonstrated calculated human-directed aggression that would continue to pose public safety threats regardless of location. Our responsibility to protect human safety must take precedence when dealing with bears that have lost their natural wariness of human contact. The media coverage of bear number 47's euthanization generated both support and criticism from various wildlife advocacy groups and public safety organizations. The scientific basis for the decision was clearly documented, but the emotional aspects of destroying a healthy wild animal remained controversial. The incident contributed to ongoing debates about wildlife management philosophy, human encroachment into traditional habitat, and the practical challenges of coexistence in areas where human development intersects with apex predator territories. Maggie's recovery process extended over several months and required multiple surgical procedures to address the compound trauma she had sustained. Dr. Williams' surgical team successfully repaired her fractured arm using internal fixation hardware, though permanent limitation of motion remained likely. The facial reconstruction required plastic surgery expertise and resulted in functional recovery with minimal cosmetic evidence of the attack. Most remarkably, neurological assessment revealed no permanent brain injury, despite the massive impact she had sustained. Mrs. Lawson's survival represents a combination of immediate emergency response, optimal medical treatment, and remarkable personal resilience. Dr. Williams reported to the medical team conducting follow-up evaluation 6 months after the incident. Her recovery has exceeded our initial expectations, though some permanent physical limitations are inevitable. The psychological recovery process will likely require ongoing support and may take years to complete. The psychological impact of the attack proved more challenging to address than the physical injuries. Maggie experienced symptoms consistent with post-traumatic stress disorder, including sleep disturbances, anxiety responses to outdoor activities, and intrusive memories of the attack. Her treatment team included trauma counselors with specific experience in wildlife attack recovery, a relatively specialized field that reflected the unique psychological challenges such incidents create. Tom and Patricia Hendricks also required counseling support to address their own trauma responses from witnessing the attack. The helplessness they experienced while watching their neighbor being mauled created lasting anxiety about outdoor safety and guilt about their inability to prevent the tragedy. Their recovery process highlighted the broader community impact that such incidents create beyond the immediate victim. The long-term implications of the incident extended to wildlife management policy at both state and federal levels. The successful emergency response demonstrated the effectiveness of coordinated multi-agency protocols, leading to enhanced training programs and equipment upgrades for rural emergency services. However, the attack also revealed gaps in prevention strategies that relied primarily on individual property owners to maintain bear-proofing measures. Dr. Chen's post-incident analysis contributed to revised FWP guidelines for bear habituation monitoring and community response protocols. The behavioral indicators that had preceded bear number 47's attack became incorporated into early warning systems designed to identify problem bears before they escalated to human-directed aggression. These systemic improvements represented positive outcomes from an otherwise tragic incident. This incident taught us that individual bears can develop behavioral patterns that make them uniquely dangerous, regardless of the precautions taken by individual property owners, Dr. Chen explained in her final report. Our management strategies must evolve to include more proactive monitoring and intervention before habituation progresses to aggressive behavior. Prevention remains far more effective than response, but prevention requires system-wide approaches rather than individual responsibility alone. The anniversary of the attack provided an opportunity for reflection on the lessons learned and progress made in wildlife management and emergency response capabilities. Maggie's continued recovery represented both personal triumph and community resilience in the face of natural forces that remain largely beyond human control. Her story became part of the collective memory that shapes how rural communities understand their relationship with the wilderness that surrounds them. The broader implications of the incident contributed to ongoing discussions about development patterns in traditional wildlife habitat, the effectiveness of current bear management strategies, and the practical challenges of coexistence between human communities and apex predators. These conversations reflected the complex balance required to maintain both human safety and wildlife conservation in areas where natural and human systems intersect. Bear attacks remain statistically rare events, but their impact extends far beyond the immediate victims to include families, communities, and wildlife management systems. The incident at Margaret Lawson's garden represented both individual tragedy and systemic challenge, highlighting the ongoing evolution required in how society manages its relationship with the natural world. The lessons learned continue to inform policy, emergency response capabilities, and community education programs designed to minimize the likelihood of similar tragedies, while preserving the wilderness values that define Montana's character. The story of June 27, 2025, serves as a reminder that the boundary between civilization and wilderness remains permeable, requiring constant vigilance, scientific understanding, and community cooperation to maintain the delicate balance that allows both human communities and wildlife populations to thrive in shared landscapes. Margaret Lawson's survival and recovery represent hope and resilience in the face of natural forces that continue to shape life in grizzly country, while the loss of bear number 47 reflects the difficult decisions required when coexistence breaks down into conflict. In the end, the incident stands as a testament to both the fragility and strength of the relationships that define life in wilderness areas. The quick thinking of neighbors, the professionalism of emergency responders, the skill of medical professionals, and the determination of a remarkable woman combined to transform potential tragedy into a story of survival and community support. These human elements provide the foundation for continued coexistence with the natural forces that make Montana's landscape both beautiful and dangerous. The legacy of this incident continues to influence how communities, wildlife managers, and emergency services prepare for the challenges of living in grizzly habitat. The improvements in protocols, equipment, and understanding that resulted from careful analysis of what happened that morning have already prevented other potential tragedies and will continue to benefit both human residents and wildlife populations for years to come. In this way, the suffering experienced by Margaret Lawson and witnessed by her community has contributed to positive changes that honor both human safety and wildlife conservation values. The story remains unfinished as Maggie continues her recovery and the community continues to adapt to the realities of life in bear country. Each spring brings new challenges as bears emerge from hibernation to seek food in a landscape increasingly shared with human development. The lessons learned from June 27, 2025, continue to inform how individuals, communities, and agencies prepare for these annual encounters between human and natural systems. The courage demonstrated by all involved, from Maggie's fight for survival to her neighbor's brave witness and quick action, from the professional responders who risked their safety to provide aid to the medical team who worked tirelessly to save her life, represents the best of human response to natural crisis. These stories of ordinary people rising to meet extraordinary challenges provide inspiration and guidance for others who may face similar situations in the future. The wilderness that surrounds Helena continues to harbor both beauty and danger, requiring residents to maintain the awareness and preparedness that define life in grizzly country. The incident at Margaret Lawson's garden serves as both warning and instruction, reminding all who live in such areas that respect for natural forces must combine with practical preparation to create the foundation for safe coexistence with apex predators. As Montana's grizzly population continues to recover and expand, incidents like this one remain possible despite the best prevention efforts and management strategies. The response capabilities developed and refined through this experience provide communities with enhanced ability to manage such crises when they occur, while the prevention strategies informed by this incident's analysis help reduce the likelihood of future attacks. The story of June 27, 2025, ultimately represents both the challenges and possibilities of coexistence between human communities and wildlife in the modern American West. The tragedy that befell Margaret Lawson and Bear Number 47 reflects the ongoing tension between conservation success and public safety, while the remarkable response and recovery demonstrate the resilience and cooperation that make continued coexistence possible in one of North America's last great wilderness areas.